These things have gotten too, okay, a lock, a line. What am I doing wrong? Ooh, sorry. I think I just didn't hit power. Okay, it's fine. Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna, there we go, I got it. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I'm here in the NYT Cooking studio with another episode of Try This at Home. Today I'm making a recipe for classic cinnamon rolls. These to me are my ideal cinnamon roll. They have a defined swirl, delicious cream cheese icing on top, and this to me is a recipe that should be sort of in everybody's back pocket. It's not super technical, so it's friendly even for sort of non-bakers or beginners, and there's not a single person that will not love one of these cinnamon rolls. I think cinnamon rolls are part of almost everybody's cooking lexicon. It's something that people start making out of the can. Hopefully this will help people graduate into homemade, because I think the point of this recipe is that these are superior in texture, flavor, and have that really classic look. It's just really fun, and I think it's going to be better than, I don't want to say every cinnamon roll you've ever made or eaten, but they're really, really good. So the first step in the process, obviously, is to make the dough. With any kind of breakfast baking, especially if it's yeasted, I always think it's nice to be able to set it up the night before so you can bake in the morning without having to spend several hours of prep. So this dough is designed to be made the night before, and then you're gonna chill it overnight. It also benefits the dough to have that nice, long, cold rest. It improves flavor. It improves texture, and it also makes the dough just easier to handle. The first thing I'm gonna do is kind of an old-fashioned step called scalding. And what scalding does is it actually denatures some of the proteins in the milk, and it's those proteins that will inhibit gluten production as I'm mixing the dough. So this basically helps the dough to develop faster, more effectively, and that's gonna lead to improved texture in the dough. I feel like a lot of times with cinnamon buns, anything where you have a kind of yeasted sweet dough, they tend to be more crumbly and a little bit drier than I want them to be. So all of these little steps that you're gonna see me do for the dough are in service of improving that texture. So when you're scalding, you don't wanna let it come to a boil. And milk is one of those things where if you have it under high heat, it can boil really quickly and then boil up and out, and then you make a mess. So keep an eye on it. There's a lot of visual cues for when you're at that point just under boiling. You'll see the little ring of bubbles, the kind of rippling under the surface. We're gonna hold it at that temperature for about a minute. And now I'm gonna measure out 1/3 of a cup of the hot milk. So just right into my measuring cup. You can see it's steaming. That's another good sign. I have the dough hook on here. I know that a stand mixer is a big, pretty expensive piece of equipment. But for a dough like this, where we're going for full gluten development, it's just the best tool for the job. So I have my saucepan here with the remaining 2/3 cup milk. It's still off the heat. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a portion of the total flour in the recipe. So this is 1/4 cup. I'm going to add this to the milk, and I'm gonna make this roux-like mixture where I'm gonna cook the flour, and it's gonna do this step called pre-gelatinization of the starches. And when that gets added to the dough, it really increases the ability of the dough to hold onto moisture. I think this is kind of the most important step in developing this dough that's gonna stay really soft. So you wanna whisk really vigorously to work out any lumps, but if there are lumps, it's not a big deal because it's the action of the stand mixer that will help smooth everything out. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this back onto medium heat, and I just wanna cook this mixture, whisking constantly, and if you can, try to get into the crevices of the saucepan so that nothing scorches. And you can see it's already quite thick. You can see that all of the starches in the flour are kind of really thickening the mixture. And there's not a super defined endpoint. You're just cooking it until the mixture is really, really thick and pasty. And the descriptor that I give is that it looks basically like smooth mashed potatoes. It kind of holds its shape off the end of the whisk there. So it's this nice, thick, kind of pasty mixture. And now I'm also gonna scrape this into my stand mixer. So now we have our hot milk and our hot roux mixture in here. The problem with that is I actually wanna start with a cool mixture, and that's because a dough of this style, kind of similar to brioche, requires a really long, intensive mixing period. And that mixing is gonna generate friction, it's gonna warm up the dough, and we don't want that to happen. So I had to cool this down. To this, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of ice cold water. And I'm adding water not only to cool it down, but I think that the addition of water really does help with gluten development. If the only liquid in the recipe is milk and eggs, you just have a harder time reaching that full gluten development stage. Then I have 3 eggs cold from the fridge. You're probably used to seeing recipes say like room temperature eggs. Like in a cake recipe, really important, but here I actually want them cold. So I'm gonna crack my 3 eggs in here as well. Then I'm just gonna give all of this a whisk. It doesn't have to be smooth, I just wanna get it all incorporated so that the temperature sort of equalizes. The next step is to actually go ahead and feel the side of your bowl. It might either be cool, like room temperature, or a little bit warm to the touch. So this bowl is a little bit warm. So I'm actually going to chill this briefly, probably just 5 to 10 minutes in the fridge, just so I can get that last bit of warmth out of the mixture. And I know I'm starting with something that's at the very least room temp. So I'm gonna chill this briefly, and then we'll come back and mix everything. Okay, I'm gonna grab the bowl. And the next step is to mix. So I'm going to add my flour. I'm using all-purpose flour. You might find recipes that call for bread flour. I want that balance between light and bready. And so I think all-purpose has enough protein content that you're still gonna get that good gluten development. I just don't want it to be too bready. So all-purpose is a good choice here. So I'm gonna add this to the bowl. I'm also gonna add my yeast. So I'm adding a teaspoon of active dry yeast. I usually call for active dry because it's so widely available. Dedicated bakers tend to use instant a lot more. It tends to be a little bit more reliable. Use whatever you're comfortable with. Either way, a teaspoon is good. And if you have made a lot of yeasted recipes before, you might recall that you have to do a step called proofing the yeast, which is where you dissolve it in some more water. Often there's like a little bit of sugar added so that you can start to see some activity in the yeast. This is a step that I basically largely skip now, unless I'm really unsure about the quality of the yeast. It's just not necessary. With active dry yeast and this much mixing, it's going to get dissolved, it's going to get incorporated, and I actually don't want it to be too active from the start. I'm going to continue to mix until basically all of the flour is incorporated. So I'm just going to mix for a few minutes, and low speed is really important. It's not only better for the mixer, because sometimes it can strain if you like increase that speed against the dough, but it's also better for the development of the dough itself. Okay, so this has come together. All I want to accomplish at this stage is to have the liquid completely absorbed, all of the flour hydrated. And now I'm going to actually cover the bowl and let this just sit for 5 minutes. So this mixing process actually occurs in 3 stages. So that's the first. We're going to come back for the second stage and add our sugar and our salt. And then the third stage is butter. Okay, so after a 5-minute rest, we can uncover it. And now I'm going to add my salt and my sugar. The reason I didn't add these from the beginning is that both of these things can inhibit gluten development. So I wanted a chance for the flour to absorb all the liquid and really hydrate to sort of kickstart that gluten development before I added these. And you're gonna see a pretty dramatic transformation in the texture. So I'm gonna add my salt and my sugar. And now I'm going to turn this on low-ish speed. We're gonna mix this until the dough is smooth, elastic, kind of pulling away from the sides of the bowl. And what I love about this is that it still bakes up really tender and light, but it still has that breadiness that we want. And gluten development isn't about making something tough or chewy in this case, it's about making something that is going to effectively trap all the gas produced by the yeast so that they bake up super light. So it might seem a little counterintuitive that we're developing a dough this much, but it's actually gonna help make it lighter. So this has been mixing actually closer to 20 minutes because we got lots of conversation during the break, but I'll show you what it looks like. The texture has really smoothed out, and more than anything, it's super elastic. So that's really what you want. So if I were to take the hook off, you can see that it has this really nice elasticity. See how it's not breaking when it stretches down the hook. So that's a really nice kind of endpoint for this stage of mixing. First, I'm just gonna scrape everything down for a second. If you don't have a bowl scraper, you can just use a flexible spatula, but I really do recommend them. They're so handy and very inexpensive. So now for the final mixing stage, we're gonna add the butter, but I don't wanna add it all at once. I wanna incorporate it little by little so that the dough has a chance to absorb it and it kind of emulsifies in. So I have 1 stick of butter here cut into pieces. And it is, I would say, cool room temperature. So that's really important. Again, this dough has been mixing for so long. All of that friction does cause it to warm up. If we were adding like super room temperature butter to slightly warm dough, it'll just kind of melt. So I'm gonna turn the mixer back on low and just add the butter a piece at a time. I like to kind of throw it into the bottom of the bowl. And go ahead and let it completely incorporate before you add the next piece. Don't rush this stage. And what might happen, especially if your butter is a little bit on the warmer side, the dough might like break into pieces. If like a little bit breaks off and then it gets coated in the butter and then it doesn't quite incorporate back into the like central mass, that's fine. Just keep mixing, it will eventually absorb. So you can add more. If your butter is so cold that it breaks apart when you smush it, it's a little too cold. So let it sit at room temp. But I would say that if you pulled your butter out at that sort of beginning phase of mixing, so it's sitting out during the rest and then the 20-minute mix, you're probably in good shape. You just want to go until everything's totally absorbed. I might probably scrape down the sides a little bit, but we're almost done. So I have a bowl here, a separate large bowl. You could just use the same mixing bowl and like take the dough out, clean it, butter it, but I'm gonna butter this bowl separately. This guy, just gonna keep my hand right here. We've given this mixer a workout. I have my hand on it. I do like to sometimes monitor because I have burned out more than one mixer.
There's smoke coming out.
There is. That's not good. But that is, again, why we keep it on low. This mixer can very easily handle this amount of dough on low speed. It's when you start to increase it that either it starts to smoke or the whole thing. I've also had a mixer walk off the counter. That was also really bad. Okay, so I think I'm gonna give it a scrape. The butter looks pretty incorporated, which I think we're good. We're good to transfer it. So I'm gonna scrape this out onto my work surface. I just wanna gather this into a ball, and that's gonna be better for the dough as it rises. It's not sticky. There's sort of a tackiness to it. And you can see that at this temperature and at this stage in the process, it would be pretty hard to roll this out and fill it. So that's why that chilling is really useful. Again, not only does it improve flavor and texture, it also just makes the dough a lot easier to handle. So it firms it up. All that butter that's in there that's now kind of soft is gonna also firm up and make it just much easier to roll out and fill. I'm gonna put it into my greased bowl. So we're gonna let this rise now at room temperature before we put it in the fridge, but we're only gonna let it rise until it's about 50% larger. If you've made recipes with active dry yeast before, you'll very often see like doubled in size. We don't actually wanna go that far because when we put it into the fridge, it's gonna continue its rise. So we're just gonna let it hang out at room temperature. The yeast is going to start to like generate gas and kind of feed on everything, and this is sort of that fermentation phase. And then after about an hour, hour and a half, depending on the temperature of your kitchen, it'll be 50% expanded in size, and then it goes into the fridge overnight. So it's day 2. Now I'm gonna make the filling. And the secret ingredient in the filling are Biscoff cookies. I love the idea of incorporating an ingredient that has a lot of substance to it and has like mass and volume, rather than just filling it with sugar to get that like really defined kind of dark swirl. And of course, Biscoff cookies are like so delicious. It's like what you get on a Delta flight. They're like spicy and have cinnamon in them, and it's just like a flavor that I really want in my cinnamon roll. So I'm gonna start by pulverizing the cookies in my food processor. You could do this by hand. Basically like put the cookies into a plastic bag, press out the air, seal it, and bash them with a rolling pin. That's fine. The food processor is so fast and it does it so evenly, so I do kind of prefer it. I like using demerara sugar a lot because you get some of the sort of like caramelly flavor of brown sugar, but you still get the more granular texture. Then kosher salt. This is a really important, bringing out the flavor of all of the ingredients. Seasons it well. Again, it's not really overly sweet, so salt is there to kind of compensate as a flavor enhancer. And then a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. Use something fresh. If you've had cinnamon from the grocery store that's been sitting in your pantry for 3 years, it's probably time to get a new jar. You just want it to be fresh so you get that really kind of intense cinnamon flavor. Okay, I don't think it's gonna work. Nope, I knew it. What the hell is wrong with this thing? What am I doing wrong? Ooh. Sorry. I think I just didn't hit power. Okay, it's fine. Okay, sorry. I'm just gonna, there we go. I got it. Even with my one at home, I'm like, it's never aligned right. So I'm just pulsing this. What you don't want to do is turn it into cookie butter. So you don't want to go to the point where it starts to get kind of wet. At the same time, you want it finely ground enough that you're not getting like big distinctive pieces of the cookie, which you would then be able to discern in the final recipe. Okay, so that looks good. Let's take a look. So here I have this really nice, uniform, finely ground mixture. And once I mix it with the butter and it goes into the buns, it really kind of disappears and you get this cohesive kind of filling. And now I'm gonna add my butter. So I have 12 tablespoons or a stick and a half of unsalted butter. And this is very room temperature. In this case, you want this to be nice and spreadable because I want to incorporate it into my cinnamon mixture. So I'm gonna add that. And then just using a flexible spatula, kind of mash them together. When it's all well mixed, you'll have this smooth, spreadable paste. So this is my filling. I'm gonna set that aside, kind of clear off my work surface, get a little bit of flour for rolling out, and I'm gonna grab the dough. So before I grab my dough out of the fridge, I do wanna prep the pan and butter a piece of foil, and that's just because I want the dough to be as cold as possible when I go to roll it out, and I don't want it to warm up as I'm prepping for the rest of the recipe. So I have a 13x9 pan here. Most 13x9 pans that I think people have at home are probably glass. I would suggest investing in an aluminum pan. Metal is just a better conductor. It helps you get more even baking, and I think for cinnamon rolls that's especially important because in glass you tend to get some over baking where like the sides and the bottom will dry out a little bit before the center is done. So metal is really preferred. I have some room temp butter here. Butter the bottom and sides. Now I have a piece of parchment paper. The width of the parchment is the same length as the pan. So I'm gonna use this to line the bottom and the two longer sides. So I'm just gonna press that into the bottom of the pan. And I always really like to smooth it in and eliminate any air bubbles. And then I'm just gonna butter the parchment. Okay, so our pan is done. I'm gonna set this aside. And now I'm gonna butter a piece of foil. So go ahead and tear off a piece of foil big enough to cover your entire pan. And then you're gonna go ahead and butter it just like a surface area that is about the same size as the pan. This is because we're gonna bake them covered for half of the bake time. And I don't want the tops of the buns, if they touch the foil, to stick. You don't have to be too generous about it, but that looks pretty good. And now I have a little bit of bench flour here. I have a rolling pin. I have a small offset spatula. This is gonna be for spreading my filling. And then importantly, I have, this is actually fishing line. You could use unflavored dental floss, you could use baker's twine. So the point is that you want a really thin, kind of sturdy piece of string, because that's what we're gonna use to cut the buns. And it makes just like the most perfect even spiral. I'm all set. I'm gonna grab my dough from the fridge and I'm gonna show you how to roll it out and form the buns. So here is the dough. This has been chilling. This was made yesterday. It has this beautiful dome. It has grown quite a bit. And when it went into the fridge, it was just about 50% expanded in size. And you can see that as it chilled, it continued to rise. And that's because the inside of the dough sort of holds onto that heat, and yeast sort of fermentation slows down at fridge temp, but in that period where the dough is cooling down, it's still kind of continuing to grow. It's filled with air, so it's kind of puffy, but it's also like nice and firm because it's cold. So I'm going to roll this out. And the first thing I'm gonna do, just with my hands, is to kind of press it out and begin to work it into a rectangular shape, because the dough was in kind of a sphere, and that means that the gluten was kind of oriented in this more like round kind of matrix, and I want to get it into something more rectangular. And when I'm doing this, I'm also sort of forcing out some of that gas that built up, and that's what you want to do when you're using active dry yeast, because you want that yeast to sort of come into contact with like new food sources so that when it goes for the second rise, it gets nice and puffy and active. So whenever I'm working dough into a rectangle, I tend to really like tug on the four corners to try to exaggerate those, because as you roll it out, it does want to round a little bit. So especially if you're in a warm kitchen, you want to try to work with like some focus here, because you don't want the dough to warm up too much. So I'm going to go in with my rolling pin and I'm going to start working this into a rectangle, and I'm going to roll it out into a slab that's like almost a 1/4 inch thick, sort of between 1/4 and 3/8. Anything around there is good. And the dimensions are not like super exact, but it's gonna be something around 12 or 13 wide and 20 inches long. I mean, this is not a particularly sticky dough, especially when it's cold, but you do wanna make sure that you're dusting it with adequate flour to prevent sticking. So I like giving it kind of a turn here and there. You just don't want to do too much flour. So if you have excess flour, go ahead and wipe that away. You can see it rolls out so beautifully. It's just really smooth, and it's because we developed all of that gluten that the dough is not really even springing back. Again, part of the reason why we gave it a nice long cold rest. Is there a ruler? Is there one in here? Oh, I got it. Okay, ruler, amazing, thank you. I was making something last night at home, and I used a ruler, and I was thinking that I should write a book called Baking with a Ruler, because I do use a ruler a lot. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and fill the dough. So I have my filling here, and I'm just gonna kind of dollop it across the dough. And then I'm gonna go in with my small offset spatula and spread it around into an even layer. So I'm gonna leave a little bit of a clean border along the 3 sides, but I can go right to the edge of that long side closest to me. It's not a difficult thing to spread at all. The butter is soft, and actually the little bits of cookie are almost like little ball bearings. It's like they do glide pretty easily. So it might seem like you don't have enough, but just keep spreading. You should be good. Okay, and now it's time to roll it up. So I'm gonna start at that long edge closest to me. I think it's easier to kind of roll away from yourself. And I'm just gonna start. Sometimes what I do, especially if during that spreading process, I feel like the dough has contracted a little bit, I'll give it like a little tug toward myself before I fold it over. I think it just helps to kind of start to build a little bit of tension in the roll. You want tension, but not too much, because as I said, if you roll it too tightly, sometimes you'll get like filling leaking out. But if you roll it too loose, then you just don't get a roll that's as well formed. And then I like to just kind of move from one end to the other. Okay, so once you get to the end, you're gonna let it rest on that seam. So it's gonna rest right on that longer side where I don't have any dough, and that's gonna help it seal. So if it's feeling a little bit soft at this stage, and it's becoming hard to handle, you're gonna wanna chill this roll before you cut your cinnamon rolls. So what I would do is transfer it to a piece of parchment paper, slide that parchment onto a rib baking sheet, and just throw it in the fridge or even the freezer if you can fit it for like 5 to 10 minutes. But this still feels cool to the touch, so I think I'm good to go. So what I like to do is just kind of squeeze along the length and lengthen it out a little bit, make it a little bit longer so that I'm evening out the thickness. And that just means I'm gonna cut buns that are all even sizes. The first thing I'm gonna do is just trim off the end. Slide it under this edge, maybe about a 1/2 inch in or so. Bring the ends together and cut. I'm gonna do that here as well. Here's the part where it's like not super precise, because I wanna cut 15 buns because I think that's really the right number to fit into my 13x9 pan in a 3x5 grid. So it's a little bit hard. Like 16 is a lot easier to cut than 15 because you can just go in half, in half, in half, and then in half again to do the math. With 15, it's a little trickier because it's an odd number, but my best recommendation is to divide it into thirds and then cut each third into 5. And you can use the string and the ruler to kind of help you mark it out. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. So I'm going to cut, then same thing on this side. Okay, and now each one of these into fifths. So for the fifths, I really do like to kind of mark out where I'm gonna cut. And so you can see the whole point of using a piece of string like this is that I'm not compressing or flattening the roll at all. I'm getting a cut that is like perfectly preserving that spiral, which looks so good. As I cut, I'm gonna 1 by 1 place them inside my pan. Again, working in a 3x5 grid. You can see the spiral looks so good. Everything looks so good. I would say they're mostly equal in size. Some are a little bit smaller, some are a little bit taller, but that's okay. What happens as they bake is that they kind of like touch each other and encourage each other to rise up and get really nice and puffy. I'm going to cover them buttered side down, obviously. These are going to now rise at room temperature. This is their second rise. And I want them to go until they are almost, but not quite doubled in size. So we want really like puffy, fluffy, light cinnamon rolls. If I were to let them fully double in size at room temp before baking, what ends up happening is they actually kind of go a little bit too far and start to lose volume in the oven. And that's when you get the gaps between the spiral. And I don't want that. I want like a nice full, not deflated cinnamon roll. So the buns have been proofing for about 45 minutes. I should mention that my oven is preheated to 350. And we can just sort of peek under the foil. They look so good. They've definitely puffed up. They are starting to kind of touch like at all points. And I want to just kind of show you a good test to know if your dough is proofed. You can give it a little poke, and you want to look to see that the dough springs back slowly but holds a little bit of an indentation from your finger. So that's basically an indication that it has like a nice amount of gas in there, and the dough is also pretty relaxed. Another good tip, by the way, take a picture with your phone, and then you have a record of what they looked like when they first went into the pan, and then you can do like a side-by-side comparison. Okay, so these are ready to go. I'm gonna take the foil and put it back over, and this time I'm going to seal it pretty tightly. That is going to help them achieve what we call maximum oven spring, so like getting that last bit of rise as they go into the oven. All the gases kind of expand as they heat up, and it's also gonna trap steam, so it's gonna keep them really moist. There won't be a lot of moisture loss in the beginning of baking. Make sure you're going buttered side down on the foil again. Now into the oven at 350, and I'm gonna set my timer for 15 minutes, and then at the 15-minute mark, I'm gonna remove the foil. This is a cream cheese icing. I just feel like the buns, there's not that much sugar in it. There's a half cup in the filling, only a quarter cup in the dough itself. And I think it really welcomes this added sweetness from this cream cheese icing. And I just think there is not a single, is there like any recipe in the baking realm that is loved more than cream cheese frosting or icing? I don't think so. And I'm gonna use a flexible spatula just to work this together and get all of that sugar incorporated. And what happens is the sugar is gonna kind of draw out a lot of the moisture in the cream cheese and thin out the consistency a little bit. So it'll become a lot looser. You could absolutely do this in the stand mixer with the paddle. There's just an ease, I think, of just kind of doing it all in one bowl without the mixer. Starting with that room temperature cream cheese means that all this comes together really easily. Okay, so I have this smooth mixture, and now I'm gonna add 6 tablespoons of room temperature butter. And then same thing, I'm just gonna work this in with my spatula. It blends super easily. So once you have the butter pretty well incorporated, I'm actually now gonna switch to my whisk because I wanna fluff it up a little bit and incorporate a little bit of air, lighten it up. I'm just gonna whisk it until it's thickened a little bit, it's paled a little bit, so it's lighter. Okay, anyway, this is my frosting now. This is all set. See, it comes together really, really easily. And I'm just gonna set this aside. We need to wait until our cinnamon rolls are cooled, but looks pretty good. First of all, they smell so good. That's a really good indicator that they're done baking, is that your whole kitchen smells like a Cinnabon. They look great. I don't really want more color on them than what I have. Just kind of that light golden brown is really nice because I don't want them to dry out too much. And we're gonna cover them with icing anyway. We do need to let them cool. This part's kind of hard, but you wanna let them cool off, but they look and smell so good. The first thing I want to do actually is slide this parchment paper out from under the rolls. It's like the tablecloth. If I try to, it sort of worked. It didn't really work. This is the most fun part of the whole recipe. I am just going to spread this in a nice even layer across the entire surface. A little bit of it behind. Can I eat this part? I want to eat it so bad. Okay. All right, so I pulled out the corner piece, which I love because you get so many different textures. You get like just the faintest layer of crispiness around the edge, the kind of buttery, almost caramelized bottom. It is so fun to like unravel them. I guess unravel is the word I'm looking for. It's really hard to pick a best part. I think you have to kind of eat it all together. Like, yes, you can lick the frosting off the top, but I don't know why you would make these and not put cream cheese icing on it. It's so good. It's just a fun recipe overall, one that I hope you try at home, kind of the point of this show. But we do have more to show you, I think, of more sort of equally makeable recipes that I think you'll really love. So thank you so much for watching. Just gonna turn it on very low. It's not plugged in. Hold for extension cord. Thanks. These mixers, I tell you. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I am here in the NYT Cooking studio for another episode of Try This at Home. Today I'm making a recipe that I feel will become part of your regular baking rotation. It's really approachable. This is my ideal chocolate layer cake. I've made a ton of chocolate cakes in the past. Flourless cakes, devil's food, you name it, I've made it, but I didn't really have a go-to ideal chocolate layer cake. Perfect for celebrations, birthdays, or just because you feel like baking. And this is mine. I really did a super deep dive into developing this one and decided that this is my perfect chocolate cake. It's really easy to make, really fun, and super impressive. I can be an impatient baker, but it's always so frustrating when you've made your cake batter, your oven is preheated, and then you realize you didn't prep your pans. So I always make it a point to do that first. I have here 3 8-inch cake pans. Now these are 8-inch by 2-inch, so it's really important that you're baking in a cake pan that has at least 2-inch high sides. If you have one that's like a little shorter, like 1.5 inch, you're just not gonna get as sort of even and high of a rise in your layers. Room temp butter is really my fat of choice for greasing pans generally. So I'm gonna start by just brushing the bottom and sides with some of this butter. And also my oven is already on 350. Next, I'm going to line just the bottom of each pan with a round of parchment paper. I'll show you a really fun, useful technique for cutting a round of parchment to fit any size pan. I'm gonna start by actually folding it diagonally. So basically I have this folded edge here. I'm just gonna continue to fold it in half along that folded edge, and then in half again. I'm always kind of folding it along this one point. And then once I get it to a pretty thin triangle, so take the point of the parchment, you're gonna eyeball the very center of your cake pan, and then with your scissors, you're gonna cut right at the edge. And then go ahead and unfold it. And you have this sort of nice round-ish shape that is sized to fit perfectly inside your pan like that. And now I like to go in and just smooth any air bubbles. This is a pretty liquid batter, and so with a really liquid batter, sometimes you might get a little bit of batter like running underneath the parchment if it's not really flat in there, so just to minimize the chances of that. Putting that layer of parchment in the bottom just means you'll be able to unmold them super easily. You don't have to worry at all about sticking. It's just a good insurance policy. Now this chocolate cake only has cocoa powder in it, not like actual melted chocolate. And I just feel like melted chocolate sometimes firms up the texture in a way that I don't really love. And I think it can even dry out a cake a little bit. So with cocoa powder, you just get like pure, unadulterated chocolate flavor, and that's what I really love. So I have some Dutch processed cocoa powder right here. I tested a couple different versions of this, and I found that the version I liked best as far as texture was also the easiest to put together as far as mixing method. So I am using a stand mixer here. I have the paddle attachment. This is a method that is known as reverse creaming. It was, I think, sort of like popularized by Rose Levy-Berenbaum, author of the Cake Bible. It starts with your dry ingredients in the bowl instead of starting with your butter and sugar, which is how a lot of cake recipes start. If you don't have a stand mixer, you could do this with a hand mixer. It'll just take a little bit longer. Cake flour. Whenever you are kind of moderating the amount of sugar in a baking recipe, you often need to compensate by adding a little bit more salt because sugar is a flavor enhancer. So the generous amount of salt, it's not a typo, it's important. Then I'm adding baking powder and baking soda. The baking powder, that's going to help produce this nice even rise as it bakes. The baking soda, that's gonna give the cake like a super light texture. If you are an experienced baker, you might think to yourself, but sugar is not actually a dry ingredient, it's a wet ingredient, and that is true, but for this mixing method, it actually goes in with the dry. So I'm just gonna turn this on the lowest speed to combine all these ingredients. This is so crucial, but I do like to distribute that leavening a little bit in the very beginning. So the next step is called blooming the cocoa powder. The blooming refers to sort of like the way that the flavor kind of comes out and enhances I'm using 3/4 cup of hot, freshly brewed coffee. Coffee and chocolate, match made in heaven. The coffee adds like the liquid that we need for the recipe, but also that bitterness tends to really enhance that chocolate flavor. So this is hot. You want to make sure it's hot. Add it to my cocoa powder. If your cocoa powder seems really lumpy, go ahead and sift it first, but you generally can smooth out any lumps at this stage. Already it's like so fragrant. I get this incredible chocolate aroma. And the creme fraiche adds tang, so it's not only there for flavor, but that the acid, because it is a cultured dairy product, it is gonna then react with that baking soda that I added and create this really light texture. Ditto with the coffee. Coffee is acidic, so that's gonna react. Sour cream is a great substitute. So you can go ahead and use sour cream. I wouldn't use Greek yogurt because it doesn't have as much fat. Vanilla extract. It almost has this like velvety, luxurious texture. This is a pretty egg-heavy recipe. Eggs are so important in baking. They're gonna add moisture and also structure. I'm using 5 large eggs. I'm also adding 2 extra yolks. The yolks are there for richness. It's an emulsifier, so it's keeping everything bound together. I'm whisking this together because the eggs go in as sort of the last addition. I just want it to be really well combined, especially with really fresh eggs. The white wants to like really hold together and resists kind of breaking up. Okay, so now we're gonna start mixing. The oil that I'm using is avocado oil. You just wanna use any neutral oil, half of this cocoa mixture. And I wanna mix until everything is well incorporated. All of the flour is mixed into those liquid ingredients. And then I'm gonna increase the speed and beat it until I get something that looks really homogeneous. Right now it looks a little bit like shiny, like the oil hasn't really absorbed. With reverse creaming, with this mixing method for the cake, it's not really like the more traditional mixing method where you're creaming the butter and sugar, you're adding the eggs, and then you're adding the wet and dry alternating. It's more actually about the timing, and you'll never hear me say that, like pay attention to the time and not the indicators, but there's just not a lot visually that's happening here. With reverse creaming, because we're using cake flour and because I've added all that fat first, there's really a very low risk of over mixing. You'll almost never over mix it to the point where like you're gonna then develop enough gluten to make the cake tough. It just doesn't happen with this method, which is why I really like it. My remaining cocoa mixture and my eggs. The eggs go in the second part of the mixing process, not because they have to be last, just because it starts with liquid and fat. They just go last in line. I turn this on and then kind of slowly work up to medium. I'm gonna continue to beat this until it's gonna be super glossy and kind of the consistency of pancake batter. Okay, this looks so good. I do think it looks sort of smoother and just more homogeneous and better combined than it did in the beginning. Even though it's a pretty liquid batter, you'll still get a little bit of unincorporated, more oily bits of flour from that first mix. And what happens is when you go to fill your pans and you scrape that into the bowl, then you get like a sort of greasy layer on top because of that unincorporated fat. So I'm just gonna scrape down and around the sides. So now we're ready to fill our pans. This is why you want your oven preheated, because we want to get these into the oven pretty quickly. I do like to weigh my batter to make sure I'm distributing it evenly between all 3 pans. So for this recipe, it's about 550 grams per cake pan. 548, 550. So I think I'm gonna put 1 up here and then 2 down below. All right, 20 minutes. Okay. Oh, it smells so good. So my 20-minute timer went off. I'm gonna rotate the pans. You can see the centers are still pretty liquid, but the top one is a little more done because it's getting that heat from the top of the oven. Oh, I'm going to rotate these 2 guys. Put this one up here. Try to be gentle. And then this guy's gonna come over. That guy will go down there. I just thought I should have put the 2 on the top. Hold on, I'm changing what I did. That was so stupid. This guy should go up here. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean? Why did I only put 1 on the top? This guy should be here, and that guy should be over there. And then this guy's in the middle. There we go. Okay, that was much smarter. Okay, sorry. Okay, that's how it should be. The timer went off. They went actually just a minute or two over that 30-minute mark. So this is one of those things where it's like, do look at the indicator, not just the time. I know it's done because the top is lightly cracked. It's nice and springy, and a cake tester inserted into the center comes out clean. So while those cool, we'll make the frosting. The frosting for this cake is so good. It's actually a little bit of an unusual style of buttercream. It's based on what's called German buttercream, which is where you basically cook this very like thick pudding-like mixture and whip butter into that. So that is opposed to other styles of European buttercream, which are based on meringue. So it's just this kind of like Goldilocks chocolate frosting that's like super rich, but also kind of light, not overwhelming. I'm gonna start by chopping my chocolate. Chocolate in that 60 to 65% cacao range is really ideal because it has good bitterness, it's not too bitter, and it also is more stable. Sometimes when you get into like 70% and over, it just leads to things kind of breaking and you get like fat separation, and you don't want that. Because there is so much chocolate in it, you want to use something good quality. So it's like you can find pretty decent bar chocolate at most grocery stores. Definitely pay attention to that cacao percentage. So I'm gonna start by combining the milk, granulated sugar. So about half of it's gonna go into there, and the other half is gonna go into this medium bowl. I wanna bring this up to just even the barest simmer. Swirl it once or twice as it warms up to dissolve that sugar. The cocoa there is just to add a little bit of bitterness and of course like more intense chocolate flavor to help just balance everything out. A nice generous amount of salt because it just brings out the flavor of the chocolate. It's not like it tastes noticeably salty. I'm using flour for a very specific reason. It was important to me in developing this recipe that both the cake and the frosting freeze really well. Sometimes with cake making, because it's like tied to an event, you need that flexibility of being able to freeze it. If I were to use cornstarch, what happens when you freeze something that's cornstarch based is you get like a separation, like the liquid kind of leaks out and you lose that smooth texture. The flour doesn't have that problem. So I did do a test where I froze the frosting and it freezes so well, it thawed out, I barely needed to like re-whip it at all. It just basically maintained that smooth texture. So gives you that flexibility. Now this mixture at first is really, really thick, and it's gonna seem like there's way too much of those dry ingredients to incorporate into those yolks, but just keep mixing it. It will thin out a little bit. Okay, so here is that egg mixture. It's a little lighter in color. Now I'm gonna move on to that tempering step. So tempering is where you add a little bit of a hot liquid to your egg mixture, and that is going to gradually raise the temperature so that when I put it back in the saucepan and cook it, I don't shock the eggs and they don't curdle. So I'm gonna whisk in about half of the milk mixture slowly because it is quite thick and so you wanna loosen it up a little. So I'm gonna make sure that's really thoroughly incorporated. I'm gonna whisk this back into my saucepan. So now everything is in here and I wanna cook my pudding. So I'm gonna put it over medium heat or so. I'm just gonna whisk it constantly, really also trying to get into those crevices inside the saucepan. And because we heated up that milk and then tempered the eggs, it's already pretty hot, so it shouldn't take too long to thicken. All of those bubbles will subside. It'll hold the marks of the whisk. It'll look glossy and thick. It'll just look like pudding. Now it's important in this step that we're really cooking out that flour so that it doesn't have any kind of like starchy consistency. It is thickening and it's starting to hold the marks of the whisk. So at this point, definitely don't walk away. So I'm gonna stop whisking for a couple seconds and just look for some bubbling underneath.
Nope.
That's what you want. So now I can take it off the heat. I'm gonna add the chopped chocolate. Fold it together just so that the chocolate gets incorporated. The heat from the pudding will gently and slowly melt the chocolate. So we'll come back here in like 5 minutes. So the pudding has been sitting for several minutes. So at the moment it looks a little crazy. It's not smooth. Doesn't look like this is gonna make a delicious frosting, but it is. Turn it on low, medium low. You'll see that melted chocolate will fully incorporate. It's gonna become nice and glossy. So we just have to let this hang out for a little bit and then we'll start making our frosting. So the pudding has cooled to room temp. You do wanna wait until this cools to room temp because if there's even a little bit of heat left in your pudding, when you go to add the butter, especially because the butter is room temp, it will just kind of melt. And that's okay. You'll get kind of a looser, thinner consistency of your frosting, and then all you have to do is kind of chill it until it firms up, but it's just easier to kind of get it all in one go. Vanilla extract, just gonna beat that in. And then I'm gonna start to add my butter, a piece or two at a time. So I'm just gonna keep adding the butter, slowly blend it into your pudding base. So this is my last piece of butter. This is looking great. It is really well mixed, but I do want to scrape down the sides of the bowl. So there's some of that like pudding mixture kind of stuck around the bottom and sides. I want to just get that incorporated. Beat it once more just until it's totally smooth. Okay. So I think we're there. The frosting is like thick and spreadable and glossy and beautiful. And if you wanted to pipe this, it's like a great piping frosting. It looks so good. So now we're at the exciting part, which is assembly. My cake layers are completely cooled. They're still in the cake pans. Fortunately, they baked really pretty flat. So if your cake layers are this flat, you could just go ahead and start assembling. This one has a little bit more of a dome, so I'm gonna show you how to level that. I'm gonna start by just cutting around the sides of the pan. These pulled away from the sides of the cake pan nicely. Invert it onto my wire rack, like so. All right, so go ahead and peel that off. And now I'm going to re-invert it onto my cutting board. You could just re-invert it onto another wire rack, just anything that's flat on your work surface. So there you go. You do want to use a serrated knife. Start maybe about a ½ inch in from the edge. And then I just sort of do short little strokes. What I really focus on is keeping the knife level and flat. So once you cut into the layer, you can almost just kind of let the knife rest on that cut surface of the cake and go around as I'm also cutting through. So just make sure you're not tilting the knife this way or this way. Even if I have just a slight dome, I like to level the layers for a couple reasons. One, even a slight dome can kind of mess up your assembly. You really do want it to be flat. And two, you get to taste the cake scraps. So that's a really important part of baking. So that's just what you get as the cook. That's the first layer. I'll just show you that one more time just so you can see. Holding my knife level. For this one, I really only have to take off a very slight amount. This one honestly just baked a little bit more to one side, and that's also not uncommon if you had it on the rack where it was like off to the side. So it's gonna get like more heat from one side, set faster, the other side's gonna maybe bake a little bit taller. And then last one. Okay, I have a cake stand here. You could use a large dinner plate, a platter, or even like a cardboard cake round. That's really helpful if you wanna transport the cake. So I'm gonna start by taking a little, just like teaspoon-sized dab of frosting, putting it in the center of my platter. I have 4 strips of parchment paper here that I cut. This is just useful for keeping that serving platter, cake stand, plate, whatever, clean while you're frosting. So I'm setting them on 4 sides, leaving the center open. I'm gonna take a layer and I'm gonna start by putting it cut side down. And that is because when you cut the layer to level it, you expose the crumb. And it's the crumb that when you go over it with the frosting is going to like sort of start to fall apart a little bit, and it just can mar the frosting and it gets like mixed in with the frosting and it doesn't look great. So cut side down. So now I'm gonna take about a cup of frosting and scrape it into the center of this layer and just start to smooth it in an even layer all the way to the sides. So I'm gonna go right to the edge. Okay. Now the next layer is gonna go on top, and again, I'm gonna flip it over, so I'm going cut side down. So here I'm gonna make sure that it's nicely centered. Move it over a little bit. And then I'll spin it to make sure. Okay, that looks good. Then another cup on top. So same thing, just spreading this all the way to the edges. The third layer goes on top. Same thing, cut side down. Okay, that looks good. There's a step that I really recommend for most styles of layer cake, and that is something called a crumb coat. And that is where I'm gonna do a base layer of frosting across the entire surface of the cake, top and sides. That layer of frosting is gonna take any loose crumbs, like this little crumb here and this crumb here and anything on the surface, and it's gonna slick it to the side of the cake so that when we put the final layer of frosting on, I don't get any crumbs mixing in with the frosting, and I just get this like beautiful smooth finish. Another cup or so, just straight on top. I think it's best to apply the frosting to the top and then work it down the sides. The crumb coat is not a thick layer at all. It is basically as thin a layer as you can possibly make. So the cake will show through in places, and that's what you want. You just want like the barest layer of frosting. And now I can start to work it down and around the cake. This looks great. With the crumb coat, you want to chill it a little bit. So when you put this in the fridge, even for 5 minutes, what happens is that very outer layer of frosting, which is butter-based, is gonna firm up and harden a little bit, and that's just gonna make it easiest to apply that final layer of frosting. So I'm gonna just pop this in the fridge for 5 minutes or so. I'm gonna grab the cake from the fridge, the icing, it's nicely set. So as a general rule, when you are frosting a cake, it is easier to remove frosting than it is to apply more. I'm gonna basically take everything that I have left, which is still a generous amount, and put it on top, and then you can always remove it. I don't go for like a super smooth application. I like to make swirls and little divots and that kind of thing. So now that I have a really pretty even application of frosting everywhere, I can either smooth it, I can create texture. Sometimes I like to do a look that's like a little brush strokey, creating a little bit of pattern in the frosting. I just like this look because it's kind of easy. You're not going for perfection here, so it's kind of like the messier you are, the better in a sense. Sometimes I have to be told not to touch it too much because I get in a place where I just like endlessly run over the same areas, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I think once you like it, stop touching it. That said, I'm gonna go over it one more time, just around the edge to clean up the very top. Okay, I'm stopping. This should probably chill again, just for 5 minutes, a quick trip into the fridge just to set the frosting. I can slide my pieces of parchment out from under, so you get this like really beautiful finish and no frosting smears on your plate. Nothing to see, nothing to see. Okay, there we go. Wait, the top. Give it a, sorry. It looks so good. I think it's a really nice proportion of frosting to cake. This is what I want chocolate cake to be. It's so chocolatey, but not in a way that's overwhelming. The texture of this cake is so pleasing, and a lot of that is from the cake flour. It is so tender, but it still has like a little bit of a bounce, which I want. It's just really good. That frosting, it's rich, but it's light. It has the density of pudding, but also kind of the texture of buttercream. And it's so complimentary to the cake. It's like, I want a bite that has both. They're so good. This is my Goldilocks chocolate cake. I want it to be rich, a little fudgy, but I want it to be also light and tender. I want the frosting to be super chocolatey, but not overwhelming, not too buttery. So if you haven't made a layer cake before, I highly recommend you start with this recipe. I really do hope you try this at home. So you can find this recipe plus everything else I've made in this series and thousands more recipes at NYT Cooking. That's so good. Ooh, I have to stop myself. I'm a picker. It's a bad habit. I like to, if I wasn't thinking and there was like a pecan pie or something, I would seriously just come over and like pick off the top one by one. It's so rude. I really have to stop myself. Hey everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz, and we are back with more episodes of Try This at Home. In the past, we've tackled some big projects like croissants and bagels, and today I'm showing you a slightly simpler recipe, but is no less versatile, and it is classic challah bread. And it's surprisingly simple. It's a great recipe for beginners who are just trying to get into bread making. You don't need a stand mixer, the whole thing is done by hand. And then I'm gonna show you a couple different ways to shape it, and then another application, which is a cinnamon babka. So love making this recipe, so versatile, so good, and so fun to make. I have a lot of memories of eating challah. I mean, I'm Jewish. I grew up in St. Louis, going to a Reformed Jewish congregation where there was just like challah, for like all occasions. My first memories are eating like store-bought challah, and I did not like it. But I love making it at home, and I've come to really appreciate the qualities of a challah. So challah is an enriched bread dough. So enriched meaning there's eggs and fat added to it. I noticed when I was doing research and looking at a lot of different recipes for challah that a lot of them call for like a really large quantity of yeast, like tablespoons of yeast to make 1 or 2 loaves. And generally speaking, the smaller amount of yeast, the longer the fermentation, the better the quality of the bread, the better the flavor, the better the texture. So I wanted to use kind of sound bread making principles in this challah to achieve not just something like really beautiful and tasty, but to make like a really good quality crumb and have, that tends to like stale slower and just last longer and just overall taste better. So the first step of the recipe is to do something called a pre-ferment. A pre-ferment is a mixture of like a portion of the flour and liquid in the recipe that's mixed with the yeast and is allowed to kind of like activate just at room temperature, and then it's added to the dough. It's really easy. This is called a sponge. So a teaspoon of yeast. Use a large bowl because this is the bowl that you're going to mix the rest of the dough in. Then I have some warm tap water here, and I'm gonna add just a 1/4 cup. There's like a dehydrated coating around the yeast and active dry yeast. It's to dissolve that and to get that yeast like woken up and ready to raise the bread. So go ahead and whisk that together until the yeast is dissolved. Now a 1/2 cup of room temp tap water. And this will cool it down a little bit because we want a nice slow fermentation. Then I'm gonna add 1 1/4 cups flour, so about 170 grams, and this is a portion of the flour in the final recipe. So this goes in. Once you've added the flour, go ahead, you can use a flexible spatula like this or a bowl scraper, and just stir until all the flour is hydrated, and you'll have this kind of like thick looking batter kind of mixture. So just, you wanna make sure there's no floury spots, and I like to make sure the sides of the bowl are scraped down really, really well. But you don't need to mix beyond just like combining everything well. Okay, so this is ready to go. And now I'm going to cover this and let it sit. Instead of using plastic wrap, you can just cover it with like a dinner plate like this. And we're gonna let this sit at room temperature until you'll notice like a dramatic transformation. It will loosen up, it will expand in volume a couple times, even triple in volume, and the surface will be super bubbly and even a little bit domed. So it's gonna look like it's on the verge of collapse. And that's when it's ready to mix the dough. So this is the sponge that we mixed a few hours ago. It actually went like a little bit long. The way that I know that it's like a little bit past its prime is because it's cratered a little bit. So it was super domed and bubbly, and there's like a little bit of a high water mark around the edge. But that's okay if it goes a little bit past. It's happened to me many times. It's not that big of a deal. But we do want to mix the dough as quickly as possible. All of the water that is in the dough is already in the sponge. So the only other liquid ingredients I have are eggs and then my sweetener and the fat. So again, I'm using olive oil and honey. I just love the flavors in challah. I have 1/3 cup of olive oil, then honey. Okay, so then I'm gonna add 2 whole eggs and 1 yolk. This gets whisked together, mostly just to break up the eggs. Then I'm gonna add this to my bowl with our pre-ferment. Again, everything just gets mixed here in this one bowl. Oh, I should say, I'm using bread flour here. That's an important part of the recipe. So bread flour is a high protein flour, and that higher protein corresponds to the amount of gluten that you can develop in the dough. And it's that gluten that's really important to the structure of the challah, the texture of the crumb, all of that. So I have 3 additional cups of bread flour. Again, I recommend weighing everything. Then a tablespoon of salt. So I'm using Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. It seems like a lot of salt, but it's a lot of dough. It makes a really big loaf, and you really do need all of that salt to like bring out the flavor of everything. It's also important to the texture. So now I'm gonna use, you can use a flexible spatula, but I'm gonna use a bowl scraper. Make sure you're scraping along the bottom of the bowl because you wanna incorporate that pre-ferment, and you can see it has this like kind of crazy stringy texture. See that? So we want to mix everything together, and then make sure you have a clean work surface because we are going to need this by hand, just right on the countertop. If you wanted to use your stand mixer, you certainly could. You should mix your pre-ferment in the bowl of the stand mixer and then follow all these instructions, And then I would actually still mix this part by hand because the dough hook doesn't like really easily get against the sides of the bowl. So go ahead and mix everything like this by hand, then pop it into the stand mixer with the dough hook. Okay, this has mostly come together. It's like a shaggy dough at the moment. I have some little dry bits. This makes a pretty sticky dough at first, so I'm gonna really generously flour my work surface with some bench flour, and then this whole mixture gets scraped out onto that surface. Then a little more flour over top. And this is that stage where handling the dough and feeling it is really important because we are going to knead this together. We're gonna work it for a good like 10 to 15 minutes until it's super smooth and supple, and I'll show you a test for when you know you're done with the kneading process. So kneading is a process of working the dough and developing all of that gluten. And it's a motion that is like folding and kind of pushing away. I like to work with my left, like this sort of fleshy part of my left palm with my right hand on top for extra push. And then really kind of like pressing the dough and sliding it across the surface. Then I give it a little rotation and a fold, and it's that same kind of pushing away. So I can tell at this stage that this dough, it's not feeling particularly sticky, so I might not need to add any additional flour. But as you work it and that flour is like hydrated, it might become a little bit sticky. So if it starts to stick to your hand or the surface, just add a little extra flour. And you're gonna keep adding flour as you go if at any point it gets a little bit sticky. If it comes off on your hand, if it sticks to your hand, it's sticky. But if it clings to your hand and then releases, that's tacky. Okay, so it's picked up like most of those dry bits. And if you have little dry areas, you can like run the dough over them to pick them up. It's still pretty streaky and like mottled looking. And so we want to just knead this until it becomes really smooth, really supple, nice and elastic also. And this is like a good 10 or 15 minutes of kneading by hand. So as I said, the recipe is designed to be flexible depending on what kind of flour you're using, because flours absorb moisture differently. So if you feel like you're adding a lot of flour, don't be alarmed. It's normal to have to add up to like even an additional half cup of flour as you knead. Both as you knead and as you knead. Both types of knead. I've been kneading this for probably between 10 and 15 minutes. So now I'm gonna show you a test to determine if you're done with kneading and you're ready to move on to bulk fermentation. So you're gonna pinch off a piece of dough. You can just like pinch it off with your fingers like this. So it's like a golf ball sized piece of dough, more or less. And you're gonna take your fingertips and just flatten it out. And then you're gonna gently pull it apart in all directions and flatten it out further. And the idea is what we're doing here is we're checking for sufficient gluten development. So this is something called a window pane test. And you don't wanna pull it too quickly. You have to do it sort of slowly. But what we wanna achieve here is a almost film-like piece of dough that is so thin that light can pass through it. And that is how you know that there is sufficient like elasticity in the dough and enough gluten development that you can proceed. So here you can really see. It's good to hold it up to a light source to double check. Yeah. So this is our window pane. Again, if it tears before you get to this point, go ahead and continue kneading. And then just, if you're there, stick it back on the dough. If you are making a raisin-studded challah, which is the traditional challah that's eaten at Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, you're gonna wanna soak your raisins. So I have a half cup of golden raisins, and I just poured some hot water over them to hydrate them and plump them. Dried fruit, particularly dried grapes or raisins, has like a very high concentration of sugar, and it's so high that will actually pull moisture from the dough and will dry out the dough if you don't soak it first. So that's the purpose of soaking. So these have been soaking, they're nice and soft and plump. I'm gonna drain them. So I drained it, and now I'm gonna pat the raisins dry. Because otherwise, if they're really wet, it's gonna be hard to incorporate them into the dough. And now I'm gonna show you how to incorporate them. To knead them in, what you wanna do is flatten out the dough. So just kind of press it with the heel of your hand. It doesn't have to be any particular shape at all. You just wanna flatten it and create a lot of surface area. Now I just kneaded this dough, so it's like a little bit springy. If you're getting lots of spring back, you can let it rest for like 5 minutes. You can also use like the friction between the dough and the surface to help it flatten out a little bit. So once you have it flattened out to like just under an inch thick, You are then gonna scatter the raisins over the surface and then gather everything up into a ball, and then we're gonna knead it until all the raisins are evenly distributed throughout. So you can just kind of like, you can roll it up or just kind of fold it up like this. And this is just an easier way to do it. It means that like all the raisins are enclosed and you're not dealing with like, you know, like raisins all over the surface and trying to pick them up and getting them into the center of the dough. I can feel them like inside. I don't love raisins. I would not opt for this challah, but I think it's a great option because it is so traditional. But this is what I like about the recipe is you can use the dough in so many ways, and this is just one application. But so this is ready to go. And we have several other doughs that we set up ahead of time to show you all the variations. So this is just that one round variation for Rosh Hashanah, and then we have our 6-strand and our cinnamon babka. So I'm really excited to get into that forming process, but first we have to let this rise. So as I said, this goes into a bowl. You can dust it with a little bit of flour first and then into a clean bowl. We're gonna let this sit at warm room temperature. Again, something in a warm spot that's like in that 80-degree range is really good for proofing. It's gonna become super pillowy and soft, and when you poke it, it will spring back but leave a little indentation. And that will take, 1 to 2 hours, possibly even longer depending on temperature. We have our challah dough that has risen. So I want to show you what it looks like. I would say doubled, maybe even slightly more than doubled in size. And I wish you could feel what it feels like, because it is just like so pillowy underneath. When I press down, you can see that it springs back, and that's an indication that there's lots of gas in there, but then it holds an indentation. So this looks great, it feels great. Really excited to braid it into a 6-strand braid. The first time I tried a 6-strand braid, I was trying to read it from like a recipe, and I was just like, my brain I could not follow it. And it's a little bit tricky, like if you lose your process during it, it's a little hard to get back on track and to like see where you are. But I'm gonna walk you through all the steps. It really does, to me, make the most beautiful braided challah though, the 6-strand braid. So I'm gonna turn the dough out. Now I can't tell you exactly the weight that each piece will be, because it depends on like how much flour you added in your dough in particular, but it will be somewhere between 180 and 190 grams per piece. So I like to, oh, it feels so good. It's like really, really fun to feel and handle. It's just a really satisfying textural recipe. I'm gonna go with 190 per piece and see where that gets me. 190. Oh, okay, I'm really gonna be more like 180. I mean, you don't have to be this crazy about it. You can, if they're a couple grams off, it's like no big deal at all. I like to kind of like bundle everything up and tuck them in. This tends to give you a really nice, smooth strand. Now, another thing you can do is if you feel like lots of big air bubbles in there, go ahead and pop them and squeeze them, because any big pockets of air is just gonna make it difficult to roll out. You shouldn't really need a lot of flour or even any flour at all. Again, it's that friction between the surface and the dough that's going to help you lengthen it and stretch it out to the size that you want. So I'm just going to apply like even pressure along the length of my hands back and forth from the center outward. And I also like to taper the pieces a little bit at the ends, and that gives you this really nice evenly shaped braid. Now, if you need additional friction, like maybe your dough is stiff or you had a little extra flour and you're not able to get that friction with the surface, you can just put like a couple drops of water on your surface and smear that around, and that will help you. Like, I'm not actually getting that much friction, so I might use a tiny bit of water. I literally just wet my hand. All right, that actually helped a lot. Okay, so let's see the length on this guy. All right, that's about 18 inches. So now I'm going to just roll out all of my portions of dough to the same length. And then once you have one measured, just use it as your benchmark for the rest. So all of my strands have been now like elongated and lengthened into these ropes. Now I'm ready to start braiding. I'm gonna do one quick step though. I have some bench flour right here. I'm gonna dust the strands really lightly in flour just to coat them. So if you like mess up and you have to go back and unbraid, then you won't have like lots of sticking. It also helps to preserve some definition in between the strands as it bakes. So I like this little step. Dust them a little bit, and then I like to kind of like give them give them a roll through the flour. I'm gonna now orient the strands vertically. So I'm gonna line them all up next to each other. Okay, so now to start your braid, you are going to pinch everything together at the very top. So just bring all the ends together and pinch. And now, here's where you want to pay extra close attention. When I was teaching myself how to do this, I looked at YouTube videos because you really have to see it done. It's so hard to follow when it's being described in words. So have your laptop next to you while you're doing this. Have a clean finger for like hitting, like the space bar to start and stop the video, and just follow along with me. I'll go slow. So the first step is going to be to cross the outer right strand, so that's on the far left. Like you don't want to apply too much tension at this point. So just kind of loosely bring that over. And then you're going to take what was originally the far left strand, and which is now second from the left, so this one right here, and you're going to cross it all the way over to the far right. So you have this little twist here at the top, okay? So then take your other strands and separate them a bit with this space in the middle. So you have a group of 2 here and a group of 2 here. Okay, so you're going to take that very first strand we moved that was over here and that is now up here, the one that is on top. So you see how this one is crossed on the bottom and this one's crossed on the top. You're gonna take the one on top and you're gonna move it down toward the center, but you are going to group it with the ones on the right. So the one on the top, if you're moving from the left, is gonna come down and be grouped with your 2 strands here on the right. This folds down like so. So now I have a group of 3 strands right here. I'm going to take the second strand from the right, or the kind of outermost strand from the group of 3, and now cross it all the way over to the far left. So now again, I have my 2 strands out to the sides, then I have my 4 strands here in the middle with 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Then I'm going to take the strand on the top right, which is now the one on top. So I have my horizontal strands here, the one on top, bring it down to the middle, and I'm moving from the right, so I'm gonna group it with the 2 strands on the left. Just bear with me, okay? So you're gonna take the one of the 2 sort of horizontal strands, the one on top, and bring it down to the middle, grouping it with the strands on the opposite side. So moving from the right to grouping with the strands on the left. Now I have a grouping of 3 strands on this side. I'm going to take the outermost strand, or the second from the left, and cross this one over here. So it is just a matter of repeating that motion, taking the sort of the strands that are on the sides, taking the one on top, moving it to the center, and grouping it with the strands on the opposite side. So now, this is how you know if you're getting lost in the process, take a look at your setup. I can see here that I have 3 strands on this side, so I know I have to move the outer strand to the opposite side. And now taking the strand that's on top, moving it from far right to like center left. Now I have 3 strands over here. I'm gonna take the outer strand of the grouping of 3, move it to the far right, and just continue that process. Does this make sense?
Yeah, no, totally.
Okay, it's a pattern. Already. Okay, now once you get to that, once you've done it a couple times and you get into this, where you get the feel of it, start to apply a little bit of tension. So you want to create a little bit of tension in the braid, and that's gonna help you get a really nice rise out of your dough. So that just means giving it a nice little tug as you work. So you see I'm ever so gently tugging on it as I move it over. And you can see that it makes this incredibly beautiful pattern with a sort of center tall braid and then a lower braid underneath. It's so pretty. So, okay, so I'm kind of at the point where it's I can't really figure out my next step anymore. So this is where I just kind of, I'm oh, well, bye-bye, tablespoon of dough or whatever. So that's perfectly fine. Okay, so now I have this beautiful, long, kind of skinnier braid. And now I'm just gonna transfer it to my lined baking sheet. If you can use a bench scraper or a bowl scraper to help you, or you can just kind of lift it up. So kind of rock it over. This looks so pretty. I'm so excited about it. And now we are going to let this proof. But before I let it rise, I'm actually gonna do a quick layer of egg wash. What I love about challah is that incredibly burnished, shiny exterior. And the best way to achieve that is to do 2 layers of egg wash. I'm just gonna do a thin layer across every little bump of dough. You don't want like lots of pooling egg on that baking sheet, so just, a thin but thorough layer. Okay, so spoiler, here is the baked challah, and here is my unproofed braid. So this is really important because I want you to see the size difference. I one time spoke to a baker who told me that the point of bread making is to take the smallest amount of ingredients and make them as big as possible. This is what I want to illustrate here is like how important the proofing process is you want to get from here to here. Like the first couple times I made this, I underproofed it because I was going for that like just normal doubled in size kind of look, and it really needs to go longer. The egg wash here is like a little bit sticky, and so I'm gonna oil the plastic wrap. That's an important step. So you want to cover it loosely with plastic. So I kind of just like drape it, let it fall on there as loosely as I can. So now that we saw the 6-strand braid, I'm gonna show you the technique for forming the round, which is way, way easier. So I'm gonna uncover this. This is the dough that we mixed this morning. And you can see same texture, like just so, that's one of the, don't be alarmed, it's not bruised. This is just like a smeared raisin. Don't look at that. Same texture, just like so pillowy, so airy. It's really so much fun to like touch. Now I don't need the scale for this because the forming is so much simpler and evenness is much less important. So I'm just gonna divide the dough in half. And this is, I really can just eyeball it. It's much less important that these are the same weight. Okay, and now I'm gonna take each piece and roll each one into a long snake that's about 28 inches long. I like to pinch, not only to start to lengthen it and form this shape, but to squeeze out any big air pockets, because that just makes it harder. So same basic like proportions of the snakes. So, mostly even, but slightly tapered at the ends. That makes the forming a little bit easier. And you can see that like, even if maybe you hadn't like kneaded your raisins throughout really thoroughly, but this technique, like this forming shape, they'll be really evenly distributed, even if you didn't knead them in so thoroughly. So I'm going to take my 2 strands, I'm going to cross one over the other. So right in the center, making an X. Okay, so then you're going to go on one side and you're going to twist the strands. And again, this is going to help you create tension in the dough. And it's that tension that's going to form like a really nice, even, tall loaf. Okay, so, and then go ahead and twist the other side as well. Okay, and then you're just going to start at one end of your twist, and you are going to start to fold it in on itself and coil the dough. And then once you get to the end, just kind of bring that around. And now you have this like beautiful, tall, it looks, I think, like more ornate than it really is to form on there, but really a quick way to form a round. And then same thing, some oiled plastic wrap, and we're gonna look for the same indicators of doneness before we bake. Okay, this is a fully proofed braided challah dough. So I'm gonna show you the indicators of a fully proofed loaf. And I do think that underproofing is one of sort of the potential pitfalls of this recipe. It is easy to kind of like jump the gun a little bit and put it in the oven prematurely. So you wanna really make sure that you see that size expansion. This is, like, to me, easily doubled in size. And visually, like, I can almost see the little air bubbles underneath, and it's super, super light. And when I press onto the dough, it springs back pretty quickly, but leaves an indentation. So this looks great. I'm gonna give it a final layer of egg wash. And I have my oven on 350. Be careful when you're applying the egg wash because there's so much air in there that you don't wanna like poke the dough or deflate anything or puncture it anywhere. Also keep in mind that you could refrigerate the dough, I forgot to mention this, after the shaping, but you could refrigerate the unproofed loaf also with the egg wash and the oiled piece of plastic, and then pull it out of the fridge the next day and let it proof on the countertop. And because it's starting cold, it's gonna take a little bit longer, but a good option if you wanna kind of divide up the timing and the work. Okay, so it's gonna go into the oven. This will bake for 30 to 35, and I'm looking for like super deep golden brown color. It will sound hollow on the bottom when tapped, and I can also take the internal temperature if I'm not sure. So if it's a really well-proofed dough, you shouldn't really need to take the temperature. The color indicator should be enough. But if you're unsure, you can always stick a thermometer in the center and look for like 190 to 200 to register. So 30 to 35 minutes. Oh, sorry, one thing. If you want to add sesame seeds or poppy seeds, this is the time to do it. Do it after that second layer of egg wash. They'll stick really well. I like to be super generous with it, but I'm gonna leave this one plain so we can just appreciate the raw beauty of the braid. This is my raisin challah. It has been proofing for maybe like an hour and a half. That looks great. One fantastic application of our challah dough is babka. And this is a cinnamon babka, and I kept it dairy-free because we know that the dough is dairy-free. So why add it, you know, when we're doing the filling, keep it parve. Plus, I'm kind of doubling down on like the olive oil flavor. And this is such a wonderful and like slightly unexpected version of cinnamon babka. So the dough, you know, we make a full recipe of dough, divide it in half, and you make 2 babkas, so you'll need 2 loaf pans. I have a piece of parchment paper. I cut the width of the parchment paper to fit the length of the loaf pan like that. And I have a little additional olive oil here for brushing. Okay, so I have just a thin layer of oil. The parchment just gets pressed down into the bottom and up the sides. And smooth it really well, try to eliminate any air bubbles if you can. And then I have a little bit of excess, and that excess is useful for lifting the babka out of the pan, just to prevent like the edges of the parchment from folding over and sticking to the surface of the babka. I like to just give them a little fold. So as the babka bakes, some of that like brown sugary filling seeps into the bottom and it mixes with the oil and it makes this like olive oily caramel. It's so, so yummy. Don't get me wrong, I love butter flavor. Butter flavor is great, but it's such a satisfying kind of spin on like, you know, a buttery babka, that kind of thing. Okay, so you can set that aside. Then I'm gonna mix my filling. So as I said, I have almond flour and brown sugar, and then salt, then a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. Then I'm also gonna grate into this bowl a teaspoon of finely grated orange zest. I love the combination of like brown sugar and orange zest. And orange can be overwhelming really, really easily, but just a little bit of zest kind of perfumes everything, and it's the kind of flavor where when you taste it, you're like, what is that? You know, like what's that sort of extra little layer of flavor? It's really good. So then just mix this together really, really well. Crush any little lumps of brown sugar or almond flour if you come across them. I'm gonna set aside a 1/4 cup of this mixture, and this is going to be what I sprinkle on top. So when I was developing the recipe, I kept going back and forth of like, should I top it with a glaze? Should I top it with a streusel? And I just settled on sprinkling some of the filling on top because it gives me like that texture that I want and a little extra sweetness, and I don't have to add an additional step. So the first step of the recipe is to have your challah dough ready to go. When you poke it, you can see that the dough springs back, which is an indication that there's lots of air in there, but it leaves an indentation. So this looks great. I'm gonna turn it out and divide it in half. So I'm just gonna eyeball half. And then while you're rolling out one half, because you don't want the other half of the dough to continue to ferment and rise, you're gonna put this on like a small rim baking sheet or on a dinner plate, cover it, and stick it in the fridge. So now I'm gonna roll this out. I'm gonna dust a little bit of flour on my work surface. So go ahead, I mean, you're gonna knock all the gas out because you're gonna roll it, but I like to sort of press it into the shape that I want with my fingers first. And I'm gonna roll this out into a very long rectangle, about 24 inches long and 8 inches wide. Go ahead and roll this out. And I have a little bit of flour, but I'm not gonna use too much because a little bit of friction between the work surface and the dough is really useful. That helps to extend the dough. Because I want this to be pretty thin. And I want it to be thin because I want like a nice dramatic spiral inside the babka. Okay, so I think I'm almost at 8. If it's springing back really stubbornly, because we are rolling it out really thin, just cover it on the work surface and let it rest for 5 or 10 minutes, cover it with like a damp towel. So for forming the babka, I have a 1/4 cup of olive oil, 4 tablespoons, but that's for 2 babka. So I'm gonna drizzle just 2 tablespoons or half that amount across the surface. And this is what really creates that caramelized layer on the bottom. It's that mingling between the olive oil and the brown sugar. And go ahead and brush this across the surface of the dough. And leave a little bit of a border on the longer side that's facing away from you. So not this side, but the far side. But you can go all the way to every other edge. Then I'm gonna sprinkle half of the filling You're just going to cover the entire surface, but again, avoiding that little clean border on the further long side. So once you do that, now I'm gonna go ahead and pat the filling into the surface and spread it around so I have an even layer everywhere. Okay, it's really even, and now I'm gonna roll it up. So I'm gonna start at the end closest to me and roll away. So it's helpful to start with just like a little, working from one side to the other, like left to right or right to left, just to kind of start that spiraled effect. And one thing I also like to do is to give it a little bit of a tug as I'm going to help stretch out the dough, kind of stretch it toward you and then roll. And that will help to create a more defined spiral. So now it's all rolled up into this kind of tight spiraled log. And then once you have it rolled up, it's resting on that seam where I had that clean border of dough. And I like to give it a little pinch just to seal the dough right there. And this is also an opportunity to even out the thickness a little bit. Okay, now I'm ready to form the twist. So the babka has this kind of double spiral when you cut it open because I twist together this log. So I'm just gonna trim off the ends, just where it's the thickness is irregular. And I wanna basically trim off anywhere that I don't have full coverage of the filling. And then I'm gonna cut it in half crosswise. You can see it's starting to shrink back a little bit. So then you're gonna take your pieces of dough, you're gonna cross one over the other in the center, like an X. And now I'm gonna twist them. So twisting from one side, I'm gonna twist like this, and then I'm gonna go onto the other side and twist the rest of the way. So now I have this beautiful twist, and then this is gonna go into your prepared loaf pan. And now the final step before I let these proof is to press down and flatten that twist a little bit, just so it fills out some of the bottom. So this is our babka. It is ready for its second rise, that's the proof stage. So I'm gonna cover it and let it sit again in a warm room temperature spot. I'm gonna show you the indicators of doneness when it's proofed. Then I'll show you how to finish it with that little bit of extra topping and bake it. And in the meantime, I'm gonna form the second one, just like I did the first, with the remaining filling and olive oil. Okay, the babka are proofed. I would say they're doubled in size. They've mostly filled out through the bottom of the pan, and that's a good indicator of doneness. And that's partly why I press them down and flattened a little bit, so that just helps you to determine how much they've grown. And there again, you have that spring back. And I know I've repeated this many times, but the spring back is an indication that there is sufficient gas built up in the dough. So when you put it in the oven, it's gonna get super light. And I have an oven preheated to 350. And these can bake side by side, so you don't have to bake them one at a time. So about 2 tablespoons of the reserved filling on top. I did watch the Seinfeld, not on purpose, but it was just, I've been watching a lot of Seinfeld, and I did watch the babka episode, which is also the black and white cookie episode. Great episode. Elaine's it's the lesser babka. No one likes the cinnamon babka. Not true. Not true at all. Okay, they look great. I'm gonna put them in the oven, and these are gonna go for 40 to 45 minutes, and I like to rotate them to make sure they're baking evenly. So in they go. All right, I am so excited to cut into the challah and try them, especially the babka. It smells so good. So make sure that the breads have fully cooled. You don't want to cut into bread while it's hot because you end up allowing all of the steam to escape and it dries out the crumb. So try to be patient. And I'm gonna demonstrate what the bread sounds like. If you can hear that. It sounds kind of hollow. And so that's how you know that you proofed it and baked it really well. Now, traditionally, challah is torn, but I'm gonna cut into it because I want you to see a profile of the interior and what the crumb looks like. Okay, so this is what the crumb looks like. It is super even. It has a nice golden color from the honey and the olive oil. It's nice, there's a silkiness to it. That's kind of the way that I like to describe the texture. So I'm gonna actually just cut a slice and pull it apart and show you what that looks like. It smells, it's really yeasty. I get some of that olive oil, and I love the way the texture just kind of you can pull out, it's like string cheese. You can pull off strands of it, little threads. That to me is the classic challah texture. I love eating it this way, like little threads. Okay, that is the plain classic challah. I'm now gonna cut into the babka so I can show that to you. I love how these turned out. Like, I love the proportions, the shape is so pleasing. It's like this really cute little kind of squat loaf. I love the texture of the crumble on top, and I'm really excited to cut in and show you the spiral. Do wait for it to be fully cooled before you slice into it. And use a bread knife. I want to show you what that looks like. Can you see the steam because it's hot?
Yeah.
We did, look, it's after 5. We all gotta go home. So I did cut into it hot, but try to let it cool. Look at the spiral. It looks so good. Like, I love the definition, and it's that almond flour that gives you a really defined spiral, but it's not, we didn't have to add so much sugar to get there. So this is like a really lightly sweet babka that makes the best toast. It's so good. Wow. I love this application for challah. You don't typically see challah or like a style of dough like challah as the basis of babka, but it's really perfect because it's rich, it's light, and this is a dairy-free version where you taste it and you would not know that it's dairy-free at all. It's so rich and delicious. And the smell is like insane. Okay, I'm gonna taste it. That like silky quality of the crumb is really enhanced by that ribbon. I love the little bit of texture from the almond flour. This to me is like the best cinnamon toast, but wrapped up in one package. It's just so, so delicious. I mean, this is really a recipe that you could make truly any time for any occasion. You don't even really need a reason, but of course with the Jewish New Year coming up, do give the raisin studded round a try. And then once you get comfortable with the dough, it's something you can make like all the time, once a week if you want to. And I really can't think of like a better recipe to kind of dip your toes in the baking pool than classic challah. Such a fun recipe to put together, requires no equipment basically, and a great way to like practice your 6-strand braid. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm very excited to bring you more episodes of Try This at Home. You know what? I was debating if I'm just gonna say like macaroon, or if I'm gonna like the whole video, like Parisian macaroon or something, or macaron. But I think you have to say macaron. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I'm so excited to be in the NYT Cooking studio for another episode of Try This at Home. Today we are tackling one of the most finicky confections in all of baking, French macaron. Those little adorable, brightly colored sandwich cookies that you see in like fancy bakeries. This is how you make them at home. It's really fun, really particular. So I'm very excited to walk you through the entire process because I have now the perfect format for kind of demystifying and making it a little less intimidating for home bakers. The flavors for macaron are really endless. There's so many directions you could take it in, but we're keeping it really classic. We're starting with chocolate, which I think is a great first macaron to make at home if you've never made it before. And then we're gonna go pistachio and raspberry. So these are kind of like the standard trio that you'll find at a lot of places. But once you get a really good feel for the technique and what you're looking for in the whole process, there's so many other ones you can do. So lots to show you. Let's get started. I like to use a stand mixer for this. You can absolutely use a hand mixer. It's just a little more hands-on and like labor intensive. Then I have some rimless baking sheets. You can use a rimmed baking sheet, and for most of my testing I did use them, but eventually I started to flip them over. What can happen sometimes with the rim is that it can block a little bit of heat from circulating around those outer like shells, and that affects the feet that develop. So we're gonna talk all about feet, what are macaron feet, how do you get them? And I highly recommend baking on a silicone baking mat. If you're like a casual macaron maker, use parchment, that's fine. A silicone baking mat is preferred because it is going to give you the flattest, most even, most circular macaron. And here actually underneath I have my guides. I'm gonna use a food processor. It's not 100% necessary, but I do like to use it to kind of get all the dry ingredients together. a pastry bag fitted with a round pastry tip, a sieve for just sifting everything together. I highly, highly recommend using a scale when you're making a macaron because certain proportions of ingredients are really kind of crucial to this recipe. Very straightforward though, some powdered sugar, granulated egg whites, which have been weighed out, cocoa powder, because as I said, we're making chocolate, some granulated sugar, and then importantly, I have here some almond flour. And this is super fine. The first thing I'm gonna do is combine my mix of dry ingredients. So that's gonna be my cocoa powder, my almond flour, and my powdered sugar. In baking, usually sugar is a wet ingredient, but in this case, it's just gonna go with everything else. But I like the food processor because it just tends to work through any lumps and any bigger particles really easily, and it combines everything. And I'm only pulsing until everything looks well combined and I have kind of a uniform color. And now I'm gonna sift everything. So sifting is important. The first thing I wanna do is remove any really large lumps and particles because that is going to just create texture that I don't want on the surface of my macaron. And I just want everything to be really, really evenly incorporated. It's important that you have a very, very uniform batter. And so I'm just working over a piece of parchment. So I have some of these big, more pebbly pieces left in the sieve, as you can see. That's just something you can press through. And go ahead and discard any larger bits. That's just generally like bigger pieces of almond flour. I'm done with the food processor for now, and now we're gonna go on to mixing up our macaron batter. So the first step is to make a meringue. For most macaron, you wanna whip a very, very firm meringue. So that is going to give the batter some structure to hold its shape, which it needs to do. I am making what's called a French meringue, which is just very simply adding some granulated sugar to egg whites as you whip them. Generally speaking, you wanna work with room temp egg whites because those are gonna whip more stably. This recipe uses 3 egg whites, but more important than the number of egg whites is the weight, so it's 90 grams. Then I'm gonna add a half a teaspoon of salt. So I'm gonna start to whip this. And when you're making meringue, this is why it's useful to have a stand mixer for this, is it's really best, and you'll get that sort of more stable meringue if you whip them relatively slowly. And at this stage, it's just to break up some of those egg whites. Now you might see some recipes that have you just add the sugar right at the beginning, and that's actually fine, but you don't want to wait too long to add the sugar either because you'll start to make really big air bubbles, and big air bubbles are kind of like the enemy of macaron batter. I'm going to wait until I see it get a little bit white and frothy, which it's doing right now. And I'm gonna turn up the speed a little bit and then start to add my sugar. So we're doing this mix of granulated sugar and then powdered sugar. I like to add maybe a slightly higher proportion of granulated sugar than you might see in other recipes because, again, it's gonna help create that egg white stability. This is not done, but I wanna show you what it looks like at this stage. This is like somewhere between soft and medium peaks. We still have a ways to go at this point, so we're probably about 2/3 of the way there. But keep it on that medium high. I'm looking for the meringue to hold very sharp marks from the whisk. It's gonna go from glossy to a little bit more matte in texture, and it is also going to start to gather inside the whisk. That's a really important part. If you also have a little bit of granulated sugar that got stuck around the side of the bowl, I would definitely pause, lift up the whisk, and scrape it around because you do want that sugar to dissolve. You can see that, somewhat firm. Now, if you're adding food coloring, which I am not because we're doing chocolate, so the cocoa is the coloring agent, you're gonna wanna add it now, so you have a chance to whip it in. So I would say I probably need 10 more seconds of whipping. You will know if it's over whipped if the egg whites start to look very, very dry, almost curdled looking, like there's some separation happening. That's over whipped. So this is a nice, super firm meringue. You can see it come off the end of that whisk. It's sticking straight up. That's what you want. This is a good sign. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's totally stuck to the bowl. Okay, so now we are ready for macaronage. I have a large flexible spatula. I have my sifted dry ingredients. I'm going to start by adding about half of the dry ingredients to the bowl. I mix pretty vigorously. I really just want to get all of that incorporated. As I keep saying the term macaronage, which is the name of this step where you're mixing this batter. You want to achieve 2 things. You want to get everything evenly mixed, and you want to deflate the meringue. I am working the mixture against the side of the bowl. And it's that kind of like mashing of the meringue against the bowl that's gonna help to deflate it and pop a lot of that air. So The rest of the dry ingredients are gonna go in. You'll find that the color at first will come off kind of faint, but as the dry ingredients hydrate, it will darken a little bit. How do you know you're done with macaronage? That is a crucial step of macaron making. The most common term that you see in macaron making and recipes is lava, a lava-like consistency. I don't really know how helpful that is because I don't know how many people have seen lava. What it really refers to is this tendency to ooze yet hold its shape. But another telltale sign is that the batter will fall off the end of your spatula in an unbroken ribbon. So it's like we're under at the moment because I'll see what happens as it kind of breaks and then falls. So I need to keep going. It's evenly mixed, so that's good, but I'm still kind of folding and scraping, and as I bring the mixture around, I'm kind of pressing it against the side of the bowl. But here's another test. Make sure you have a plate with you. You can take, about a teaspoon of the batter, and you'll get this kind of peak, and keep an eye on it, and in the next, 10 seconds or so, if that peak sort of settles onto the surface, then I know that I can move on to the next phase and that the macaronage is done. You can see how it holds its shape. It's not like it's just flattening down. It's not pancaking, but it is sort of settling onto the surface. So it's like I think I'm a couple strokes away from being done with macaronage. I have my piping bag. Maybe this is like a 3/8 inch round tip. I folded the sides down. I like to actually flip the tip upwards like this, I don't know if you can see, and then put it into a tall, this is a quart-sized container, because the batter is fairly fluid, so if the tip were like upright, it would kind of start to ooze out. So I just do that to make a little bit of a stopper. So here I have my rim baking sheet and I have my silicone baking mat. Underneath of it, I have a piece of parchment though where I traced 1 1/4 inch circles with a permanent marker. Try not to form large air pockets as you do this, so that's why I took the time to kind of fold down the sides of the pastry bag. I have a kitchen towel right here, which I'll tell you why I have that. Actually, I'm gonna put it underneath. And then I have some toothpick, which I'll explain why. Lift out the bag. I like to gather it right where the batter stops and start to twist. So twisting is gonna help force it up into the end of that tip. And now I'm gonna start piping. What you wanna do is you wanna pipe directly perpendicular and not at an angle. Piping at an angle can lead to some issues later on, like uneven baking. We'll talk about that. And squeeze gently until you filled the whole circle. So this is what it looks like. So even pressure until it's filled, and then I do like a little flick of the pastry bag to break the batter so I can move on to the next one. So again, piping straight downward. The batter will continue to settle and then spread a little bit in the oven. So the final macaron will be a little bit larger in diameter than the circles I have drawn. So you'll see that I get a little bit of a point when piping, but after 10 seconds or so, it starts to settle down. So that's what you're looking for. I have 3 rows of 5, and then in between the rows, 2 rows of 4. So I like that because it helps me stagger the circles, which I think leads to better air circulation around them and more even baking. All right. So that's the first sheet. Before I move on to pipe the second sheet, and just working quickly, you can see I put that towel down here. I'm going to use that as sort of a landing pad to tap my baking sheet firmly on the surface several times. This is going to do 2 things. It's going to help pop any large air bubbles near the surface and bring up any larger ones that are underneath. It's also going to help the circles to settle and even out. So I'm gonna set this aside and I'm gonna come back to it and bring in the toothpicks. I'm gonna slide that parchment stencil out from underneath the first one. Now what I then do is I take my toothpick, you can use a cake tester, anything that's like a little skewer, and I go in and I pop any really large bubbles that are underneath the surface. And you can see that there's the little hole in it. And then once they've already been drying for a little bit, sometimes they don't always fill back in, so I'll use the toothpick to like fill in that hole. And if there's any other little pock marks left by burst bubbles, I can fill those in as well. Obviously, I love this part. I think I was making the mistake early on in the testing of just like going crazy with it, popping air bubbles. There are air bubbles in here. That's kind of the whole point. You know, it's meringue. You just don't want anything that's really, really big that's going to expand too quickly in the oven and possibly crack the shells. What you don't want to do is spend so long popping bubbles that they start to set and you're creating like more surface texture than you're solving really by popping them. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop. This next step is particularly important. I want to emphasize this is letting them dry basically at room temp. So what we want to do is allow a skin to form. That surface of the meringue is going to dehydrate a little bit and form a skin. And then when they go into the oven, there's still moisture in there that needs to escape. They're going to stick to the baking mat. The surface is going to stay intact because it has already started to dehydrate, and the moisture is going to escape through like the bottom and form this ruffly like little foot, which is the telltale sign of a properly made macaron. If you were to sort of insufficiently dry them out, the moisture will end up escaping through the surface of the meringue rather than the bottom, and you get like a domed, cracked macaron that doesn't have a foot. Set these aside, preheat the oven. We'll come back in a little bit and do a test, a skin test. So after the better part of an hour resting, these are ready to go. I went ahead and touched that little test shell that I had on the plate. I had a nice thick skin where a little bit of pressure, it didn't yield. It was nice and firm around the edge. So these are gonna go into the oven, and I'm gonna show you after about 15 minutes of baking, I'm gonna do a little test to see if they're done. So there's this foot formation that happens in the oven, and you have this nice smooth shell and a little ruffled foot around the bottom. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grasp the shell, give it a little gentle wiggle, and if it moves around sort of independent of the foot, which remains in place, it needs to bake a little bit longer. When I wiggle it, it just kind of stays put and is like firmly anchored to that foot, then it's done. So while the chocolate shells are cooling, I'm going to make the filling. So I opted to do some pretty simple kind of like stir together ganache fillings for the macaron because so you've already been through the trials and tribulations of the shells. I don't really feel like making a buttercream. So ganache is just a really simple, rich, like easy, intensely flavored filling, perfect for chocolate macaron. So the process is very quick. I have 4 ounces of dark chocolate here. When you're making chocolate ganache, you really don't want to go above like 68% chocolate in terms of like cacao percentage. That percentage has a tendency to break or like separate when you're making the ganache and you get this kind of oily broken mixture, so you don't want that. So I like something in like the 60 to 64% range, and I'm not adding sugar to it because I want a fairly bitter ganache to help offset a little bit of the sweetness from the meringue shells. So 4 ounces, I'm going to finely chop it. It's just kind of broken up, and I'm just chopping it up so that it melts relatively quickly and evenly. So having all that extra surface area will help. So to this I'm going to add, this is an optional ingredient, it's just a half teaspoon of espresso powder. Coffee enhances chocolate flavor, and then a pinch of salt, and then just about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. So then 4 ounces or about a half cup of heavy cream is going to go into a small saucepan. Ganache, it's really simple. We're just going to take that hot cream and pour it over the chocolate. I don't want the cream to boil really vigorously, and I don't want it to be too hot when I pour it over. So I like to take it and I like to swirl it to kind of equalize the temperature everywhere. And it's going to instantly start to melt the chocolate. So I give it a brief stir to make sure the chocolate is submerged, and then I'm going to let this sit for like just about a minute or so the chocolate has a chance to gently melt, and then I'll stir it. And I love the transformation that happens with ganache. It goes from this kind of like liquidy, broken looking mess to this like incredibly lush, glossy, thick chocolate mixture. That is it. That is the filling. You want to just let this sit at room temperature and stir it occasionally, and it's going to kind of set up and like get to that point where the texture sort of holds its shape, and that's when we can start to pipe it and fill the macaron. I let the chocolate shells cool. What is really satisfying and a sign that they're properly baked is that I have this really smooth baked surface that peeled away really easily from the silicone baking mat. I matched them up. Even though I had those stencils, they do come out in different sizes. Often the ones along the edge of the baking sheet come out a little bit bigger, and and spread out more than the ones in the center just because of the way that they get tapped on the countertop. You certainly don't want to over bake them, but over baking is preferable to under baking because they are going to hydrate. They're actually going to age or rest in the fridge for about 24 hours. And during that time, the shell kind of pulls hydration and moisture from the filling, and that's how you get that really chewy texture. Okay, so the chocolate macaron are all done, they're filled. I'm now going to make a raspberry and the pistachio, and then when they're all assembled and done, every single macaron goes into the fridge where they need to sort of rest and age overnight so that they can soften. And then I'm gonna show you what they look like when they're all done. I had a batch that I made last night of all 3 flavors, so we can take a look and taste. So now that you've seen the entire process start to finish, I'm gonna make a different flavor variation, this time doing a raspberry. The main difference is going to be that mix of dry ingredients and the oven temperature. We don't have cocoa powder, instead we are adding freeze-dried raspberries to that mix of dry, and I'm also going to add some gel food coloring. And we're going to bake at a lower temperature because batter with the freeze-dried fruit in it, that extra sugar, tends to brown at a lower temp. We don't want to get any color on the shell, so we're going to bake at like 275. The process is really the same. I'm going to start by combining my dry, and this time I'm using the food processor to pulverize the freeze-dried raspberries, and we're going to sift it to remove the seeds. So adding this freeze-dried raspberry powder will tint the shells a little bit, but I want to give it a little extra color so that I get like a nice sort of medium reddish pink. So adding freeze-dried fruit is a little bit controversial because it does tend to change the behavior of the batter. It can make it take longer to dry and form that skin after you pipe them. As I said, it can lead to browning at a lower temp, but I'm not adding that much. I'm adding just like a half an ounce, about a half cup. So any particles of raspberry, which are mostly going to be the seeds that are left in the sieve, you're going to discard. And now I'm going to turn to my stand mixer and start to whip my meringue. So because we are tinting the shells, I stopped the mixer shy of that like stiffly whipped firm peak stage. So gel food coloring is really important because you do not want to introduce too much moisture into your macaron batter. That can cause all sorts of problems during baking. So gel food coloring or even powdered food coloring is better. I did test it at home with regular food coloring to see if I could get away with it, and it did not work. I was having a good result from a drop of pink and a drop of red. The color kind of starts out really vibrant and will dull a little bit in the oven, so just keep that in mind. So now I'm making a raspberry white chocolate ganache as a filling for my raspberry macaron. I'm going to start with 6 ounces finely chopped white chocolate into a bowl, 3 ounces heavy cream, and to the heavy cream, I'm going to add some raspberry puree. Now to do that, I'm just going to take some fresh raspberries. I did want like fresh raspberry flavor in here, not just jam. You could absolutely substitute raspberry jam for the ganache and just do that, but to me it was going to add too much sweetness. So I like having a little bit of fresh fruit in there. And I have like a little mesh strainer here. So all I'm gonna do is press the fruit through the strainer using like a flexible spatula, or you can use the back of a spoon. It's cool seeing it like drop into the cream. Yeah. Go ahead and stir all that together. I'm gonna get this coming up to a very, very gentle simmer on the stovetop. And then to the white chocolate, I'm just gonna add, same thing I did for the chocolate ganache, a little bit of vanilla extract and a pinch of salt. Now, as white chocolate melts, because so much of it is like cocoa butter, it tends to go a little translucent, and that plus the slight pink hue makes it a little grayish and even a little yellowish, but that will go away once it firms up. So don't fret about the color. And again, if you don't love it, add just a little bit of red food coloring. And then because there's such a high proportion of fat in here from the white chocolate, it actually is best to firm this up in the fridge. Otherwise, it can just take forever at room temp to kind of set up. So I'm gonna pop it in the fridge and then we can pipe it when it's cold. moving on to our third flavor of macaron. This is going to be pistachio. To flavor the shell, I'm just going to grind in some whole pistachios along with a little bit of almond flour and my powdered sugar. The main difference here is that I'm going to sift and then regrind the solids because I want as much of that pistachio to make it into the batter as possible. And like with the raspberry, I'm going to tint the shell because the ground pistachios only gives it a very, very faint green color. So I have some green gel food coloring here. To add a little bit of extra flavor, I'm gonna bump it up with just a 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. So other than that, same process again. Here I have probably like 3 to 4 tablespoons of big particles that aren't gonna make it through the sieve. These go back in. So here's where you want to be careful not to over-process because I don't want the mixture to get oily. I'll do it like 1 or 2 more times where I sift and then regrind. So I have about a tablespoon left, that's okay. This is our dry mix. It's actually not a bad idea to like sift this 1 more time just because it's not super evenly mixed. So it's always a good idea, like the more evenly mixed it is before you add it to the batter, the more evenly mixed your batter will be. Another indicator for when you have completed that macaronage stage is what is often referred to as figure eight. And it's where you basically have enough batter falling off the spatula in a ribbon that you can make a figure eight inside the bowl, like drag the batter. Different recipes are gonna take different amounts of mixing. The pistachio macaronage happens a lot faster than the raspberry because that fruit powder tends to thicken it a little bit. So just rely on those indicators as much as you can during the process. The final filling is a pistachio filling. So I'm not making a ganache, but I am making a pistachio cream. Again, giving you like all that richness and creaminess, but it has an intense pistachio flavor because I'm using pistachio paste, also called pistachio spread. Think of it as a sweetened nut butter. So I'm gonna get this into a bowl. You can see it's pretty liquid at room temp. And I'm going to combine this with just a little bit of heavy cream. It's funny that I'm adding cream to like lighten it up, but weirdly in baking that happens sometimes. So I'm just gonna whisk this together until it's super smooth. And all my ingredients are room temp. That's an important thing to mention here. I have 6 tablespoons of room temp butter. And to that I'm gonna add a pinch of salt. So I'm gonna beat this with a paddle until it's kind of light and creamy and smooth. So now basically what I wanna do is I'm gonna whip the pistachio cream mixture, the mixture like a tablespoon at a time. So the idea here is that I'm just trying to work some air into the mixture and lighten it and thicken it at the same time. If you're working in a warm kitchen, you might need to very briefly chill this mixture, but at room temp, it should be thick enough to pipe. If it seems a little bit liquid and it won't hold its shape, then you can just pop it in the fridge for like 5 minutes and then re-whip it. So here is my pistachio filling mixture. I'm going to get this into a piping bag just like I did for the other fillings. My shells are cooled and now it's time for the most fun part because all the hard work is done. We're gonna fill them. I really wanted to be intentional about including some troubleshooting in this video. The first and most common problem you'll probably have is a domed and cracked shell. This is really, really common. The most common culprit is that you didn't let them dry long enough at room temp before baking. When you let it dry, it forms that skin. The weak spot is actually the perimeter around the base, and that's what forms the foot. But when you don't let it dry long enough, the surface has weak spots and all the air that's trapped in the batter expands up and escapes through the shell and not out the bottom to make the foot. Another common problem is they brown a little bit. Okay, so let's look at the color difference. Here is a properly baked shell. Here is one that got pretty brown. If you've ever made meringue for anything, you'll know that it bakes at a really, really low temp. And that's because at higher temps, meringue will brown really easily. So this was just baked at too high a temp. So the next problem you might encounter is unevenness in the foot formation. So here's a good example. Here's one where I have no foot right here, but like a big overdeveloped foot on this side. So you can see that literal hole where the air escaped. So there can be a few culprits here. One is maybe you didn't pipe it evenly. I could tell as I was piping sometimes that the dough was sort of anchoring to a point on the parchment. Make sure you're piping straight down at a 90-degree angle perpendicular to the surface. Also make sure that you're tapping the baking sheets pretty evenly, that you're not like hitting one side on the counter, that the whole thing is kind of hitting the countertop flat. It could also be that the heat of your oven is uneven and that it's getting exposed to a lot more heat in the back of the oven versus the front, or vice versa. This one was a curveball for me. That you can see that this one has this kind of slightly wrinkled top. It's not perfectly smooth and it's lost a little bit of its dome. That's likely due to some over mixing. It could also be due to a problem with your meringue, like maybe you over whipped it a little bit or you under whipped it. It could also be under baking a little bit. These had pretty small feet. I got sort of like a flat foot separation instead of this sort of more ruffly, like parallel looking foot like I have here. This can be caused if your oven temp is too low, and vice versa. If you have a really, really prominent foot that's really tall, that could be from an oven temp that's a little bit too high. As you can see, there's like a lot of different issues that you can encounter, and there's a lot of reasons throughout the process of what may have gone wrong. I think those are the big ones. I know I'm missing all sorts of other issues, but it's a good place to start. I made all of these macarons last night and filled them, and they have been aging in the fridge. So I want to show you what they look like. You can see that I got a nice sort of similar sized foot on the raspberry, but both the pistachio and the chocolate, which I baked at like, same temperature, different oven, just had a slightly smaller feet. I think there's sort of like a range of what's acceptable as far as the feet, like everything from this to this. I feel like this is a successful macaron. So just know that there's always a little bit of variation. Whatever, let's just taste them. I know they're gonna taste delicious. I love the texture. So chewy, but not like stuck in your teeth chewy. It sort of also melts a little bit at the same time. Sweet, but not too sweet. With that little bit of almond extract, it just is so much more kind of pistachio-y. It's so good. This is what I'm looking for. When you bite into it, you can't really tell where the shell ends and the filling begins. I like to see that kind of blending of the shell and the filling. This is, to me, like a really, really well-proportioned macaron. Oh my God. The most satisfying texture. Very pronounced, kind of pure tasting raspberry flavor. Like it really does taste like raspberry. I feel like if you've never had a macaron before and you taste it for the first time, you'll understand why people are so passionate about making them at home and why it's a project people would take on. And I also just want to say that let's say you have a batch where like the foot spreads out or you don't get a foot, they brown, or any number of things happen. Go ahead and still make the sandwiches, make the filling, put them together. They're still going to taste really good. I think I've set you up for success. If you want to try them at home, I really think you should. They are uniquely delicious. So thank you so much for watching, and we're going to bring you more episodes, so stay tuned. I want to get one thing out of the way before we start talking about croissants, which is that I'm going to refer to these as croissants for the rest of this video and not croissant, okay? Because I can't do that every time. So excited. Hey everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz, and today I am showing you how to make croissants, like the highest achievement in all of pastrydom. I don't think I will ever get tired of eating these. So we're gonna make basic all butter croissants, ham and cheese, almond croissants, pain au chocolat. There's nothing better than a freshly baked croissant, but then like somehow it gets better when you add chocolate and ham and cheese. I really wanna encourage people to try this at home because it's fascinating and fun and challenging, and like you might get obsessed like I did and just make them like 15 times in a row. For this recipe, I became like a woman possessed about making croissants. I made them at least a dozen times at home, and there is so much to learn. Now I'm very like attuned to the flaws in the recipes that I make, but even at my worst batch, they were still so delicious. You can get very, very good results at home. Like I've never had a bigger thrill than when I pulled out 8 beautiful, golden, like puffy, gorgeous, layered croissants from my oven. Croissants are in a category of pastry called viennoiserie, and generally speaking, these are pastries that are something called laminated. So laminated is kind of a technical, jargony pastry term for a layered pastry. Butter is rolled into dough, rolled out and folded and rolled out further, and this creates a series of sheets of butter separated by layers of pastry, and that is what creates this layered, crispy effect in things like puff pastry and danishes, and of course, croissants. There's just so much to talk about in this recipe. If I were editing this video, this would be like a 4-hour video. So in order to adjust the recipe so that you are able to have freshly baked croissants before noon, we do this over 2 days. So this is like perfect for a weekend baking project where you'll do the majority of the work on a Saturday, and then Sunday morning you wake up, you form the croissants, let them rise, and bake them on day 2. The first step for making croissants is to make something called the de trempe, and that is the dough that we're using that's going to enclose the butter for our lamination. I'm going to say this at every single point in this recipe. This step is very important, and you need a strong dough to support all of those layers of butter and to not collapse when you bake it. In general, if you can find a flour between 11 and 13% protein, that's a good selection. Something in that range, that's what I recommend. Now I gotta talk about yeast. Again, so many things to talk about. I'm using active dry yeast because for people at home, that's by far the easiest kind to find. Almost every recipe that I've made with active dry yeast, I'll tell you to activate the yeast or proof it, which basically means dissolving it in a warm liquid. 99 times out of 100, your yeast is alive and it's fine. I'm pretty confident that you can just mix it right into the dough. I've never had a problem doing that at home. Okay. It's 12, 120 grams of whole milk. The first thing I want to do is hydrate everything and do an initial mix. So I'm going to start by just mixing this on low. So this is going to look dry and shaggy, but let the mixer go for a few minutes and it will come together. So here we have our initial mix of the dough. It looks kind of like a cauliflower. It's not smooth. It doesn't really have any elasticity to it. You can see it just breaks, but that's okay. We want to now let it rest. I want to give time to the proteins in the flour to hydrate. This is going to help us to develop the right amount of gluten that we want. My butter pieces here are cold, which is important, and I'm going to add these to the mixer. This is the part where it's more helpful to have the mixer with a dough hook. By hand, it's really the step of adding the butter that's a little bit more challenging to do, so I'm happy to let the mixer take care of it. A nice slow mix, though, is one of the keys to the right texture of dough. The dough has transformed. You can see what a different texture it is. It's completely absorbed the butter. It's much stretchier. It's a very, very smooth and supple dough, and that's what we want. It extends easily and seamlessly envelops the butter. And here's a great tip. So this is something that I picked up in culinary school. I'm going to cut a slash in one direction and then a slash in the other direction. Basically reoriented the gluten strand so that as it rises, this will expand, and then I'll have an easier time forming it into a rectangle, which is the shape that we need for the lamination. And I'm gonna let this sit at room temperature until it's about 50% expanded in size, so 1.5 times. And then we're gonna transfer to the fridge and let it chill and finish a nice, long, slow rise for a few hours. All right, butter. Now we're gonna talk about butter. The flavor of croissants is butter. So that's where you want to go for the highest quality stuff you can find. The recipe calls for European or European style butter. That designation means that there's a higher percentage of butter fat. Butter should have some plasticity, which means the ability to bend without breaking or snapping. Kerrygold has that even when it's cold. And as we get into lamination, I'll explain why that's really important. I'm just going to sort of loosely fold up the parchment paper. And I have this kind of loose packet, and I'm going to use my rolling pin to lightly beat the butter. I don't want to in order to soften it without warming it up and make it pliable. I cannot imagine that my neighbors loved hearing this noise day in and day out, but then I would at least bring them croissants the next day. So just, this part's a little noisy. And now I want to focus on getting very clean, straight sides. And I'm making a very level block of butter. Somewhere around an 8-inch square. A little bit bigger is fine. I would say there's like a surprising number of recipes where I call for a ruler, and I'm not trying to bug you or like, the reason I'm calling for it in the recipe is because I think if you use it, it will make your life easier down the road. Like a present. You can see that I've folded the parchment into a square. The butter is smaller than the parchment, and I'm going to beat it again to fill in all of those spaces. And at a certain point, you'll be able just to roll without beating it. So I'm going to just move to a rolling motion and force the butter into any places within the square where there's an air gap. You can see that. Let this firm up in the fridge while the de trempe finishes its rise. I have a swap. It has finished its rise in the fridge and is now cold and is basically about doubled in size. So I'll show you what this looks like. You can see how the dough has expanded, and like those 4 points have become almost like corners now, so that's going to make it easier to form into a rectangular shape. And there's just a quick kind of intermediate step that I want to do before we move on to lamination, and that is actually getting this into the freezer. The stakes get higher when we incorporate the butter. We have to control fermentation of the dough. And that just means that it becomes very important to control temperature and to keep the dough very, very cold so that the yeast stay very sluggish and calm and they don't produce gases. That is going to make it a lot harder to roll out. If anyone has a great at-home replacement for plastic wrap for this purpose, let me know. I'm going to actually use a technique similar to the one I used for the butter. At this point, I'm not like concerned about thickness or dimensions. I just want it to be even. I don't want to freeze it solid. That's not going to help me when I want to roll it out. I just want to get it super, super cold and firm. So about 20 minutes should be about right. All right. So the next stage is locking in the butter. So it is enveloping the butter in the dough, and then I'm going to roll it out and do the folds for the lamination. The important thing here is that my dough and my butter are a similar texture, and that is going to help the butter to roll out evenly inside the dough. And for them to be the same texture, I need the dough to be colder than the butter. So that's why we had it in the freezer. In general, I want to go through all of the steps of lamination without adding a whole lot of excess flour. So I'm going to roll out my dough or de trempe into a slab that is basically the same width as the butter block, but twice as long. You try to maintain at all times your square sides. I keep kind of running my hands under it just to make sure that it's not really sticking. You can also give it a flip. We're looking for butter that can bend but not snap. I'm going to place it in the center of my dough and close the butter in the dough by folding the longer sides down into the center of the butter. You can do any tugging that you need to in order to even out the thickness of the dough. You do not need them to overlap. You just need them to meet. So you can see I have an even thickness of dough all the way around, and now I'm going to pinch along the sides just to prevent the butter from peeking out. I've now locked the butter in, and I'm going to roll it out and do my first turn. I rotated the dough 90 degrees so that seam running down the middle of the butter block is now vertical. I'm going to beat the dough to begin to lengthen the slab and also thin out the butter. I found that beating it and like paying extra attention to the sides will help keep straight parallel sides. So periodically lift it up, make sure nothing's sticking. Now I'm going to go in with my rolling pin and start to roll, and I'm going to make a very long, narrow slab, about 2 feet long. The length isn't as important as the thickness. I'm going to go for about between 1/2 and 1/4 inch thick. I'm not pressing down. If you press down, you risk squeezing out the butter and fusing the dough together. Then you won't have that definition of layers. So really, it's like a kind of pushing motion outward and toward yourself. So this is actually called a double turn. We're going to fold the dough in a way that quadruples the number of layers. Right now I have dough, butter, dough. But when we fold it, we multiply the layers of butter in between the dough, and that is what gives us the flakiness. Fold one end of the dough up toward the midline. And take the other side of the dough and fold that down. And now I'm gonna fold the entire thing in half crosswise. And this is now called the book. So you can see I have now a slab of dough that's 4 thicknesses. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've now quadrupled the number of layers in my slab. This is called the first turn, and each time we roll it out and fold, those layers get thinner and they multiply. At this stage, the butter is now warming and the dough is also getting warmer. And we've also worked the dough, so it's gonna wanna spring back when I go to roll it out, so we wanna chill it before we do yet another turn. And maybe a little bit of a rolling out, because the thinner it is, the faster it will chill down. I reserved the plastic from before. You can see that it has firmed up quite a bit. So I'm going to roll it out, and we're going to do the next turn, the second and final, which is called a simple turn. So it's a slightly different orientation than the first. Beating with the rolling pin. It just kind of kickstarts that lengthening process. So you might find that you have little air bubbles. That's normal. That is partly because of the fermentation. It's partly just because you maybe had some air pockets between the dough and the butter. You can just go ahead and pop them. I dust it with flour, and then I wipe the excess off. I'm talking a lot, but you also want to try to go faster than I'm going. This time we're doing what's called a simple turn, where I'm folding it in thirds like a letter. So this is just a slightly simpler method, just like that. You can see that my ends have rounded a little bit, which is a very, very common problem. I'm just tugging on the ends of the slab to try to square them off. So this is your second turn, a simple turn, and your final turn. Take advantage of the tension against the plastic wrap and use your rolling pin to force it into like a square shape again and to create sharper corners. The dough slab has been chilling, so it's rested. And now the last step on day 1 of the croissant process is to roll out the dough into a slab, kind of like a pre-shaping step. It's to get it ready for rolling and forming croissants tomorrow. You're gonna wanna spring back. Try rolling in the other direction, so roll perpendicular to the direction you were going, and it should extend that way. The dough is starting to resist me a little bit. This is a good time to wrap it up again, get it back in the fridge, and then tomorrow, when it's nice and rested, we can roll it out if needed to the right dimensions, and we're gonna cut, roll, proof, and bake our croissants. I told you it was a process. I know it's a lot, but it's worth it. We've made the dough. We let it rise. We enclosed the butter. We rolled it out. We did the first turn, the second turn, and then we left it overnight. We're getting into the really exciting part where we're nearing the end of the process. So we want to create an ideal proofing environment for the croissants. This is a really important part of the process because this is what's going to determine how light and airy and flaky your croissants are. So we are going to use our oven to create an enclosed area for proofing. I have a skillet of water right here. I want to get this to an active simmer, and I'm going to place it in the oven, which is our proofing area. Then while we form the croissants, the water will cool off a little bit, and all that steam will make this ideal humid environment. I just get really nervous about this part. Nervous, excited. Let me go grab the dough. So I'm going to give this dough a bare dusting of flour. I mean the bare minimum. If you see any air bubbles, go ahead and just pop them. Be careful when you're moving the dough so that you're not puncturing any of the layers. I am ready to start cutting. So the first thing I want to do is straighten the shorter sides. Because I want even size croissants, I am measuring and then making little marks with my cutter. And now I'm just going to use my ruler and connect those marks on the 2 longer sides and slice this into 4 even rectangles. So these are going to get sliced into 8 triangles, and each triangle is going to be 1 crescent. What's the word for a right triangle? A right triangle? Is that what that's called? Okay, so now I have right triangles. I want to make these into isosceles triangles. So anyone that thinks that trigonometry doesn't help you later in life, Just think about making croissants. You're gonna kind of eyeball it. You end up slicing like a tiny, tiny little triangle off the base. You don't really have to do this, but I think it helps to form more even crescents. And also, it does expose some of the layers at the base, which I like the way that looks in the final crescent. I like to give it a gentle tug along the short side, also a little tug to lengthen, almost like a witch's hat, like a little bit of a wider base, a long tapered point. So you don't want large gaps by any means, but you also don't want to be stressing the dough and creating a lot of tension. So I let it rest on the point of the triangle, and I sometimes give it like a little bop like that, because I want that point to stick, and it's going to rest on the point. Stick that right on the baking sheet. I'll put that guy right there, and then get 4 to a sheet. These are going to get really big. So I want to go loose on the plastic because these are going to get extremely puffy as they rise, and I don't want them to encounter resistance against the plastic. I did test freezing these, but you could certainly do everything up to this step, put the baking sheets in the freezer. You can even put them all in one sheet, freeze them solid, take them out, put them in your proofing setup just like we did, and let them rise. When I tested it that way, they took 7 hours to proof. Totally possible, and the ones that I froze were like one of the best batches I made. We're looking at around the 2 to 2.5 hour mark. So I'll check on these, see how they're doing, and then we'll talk about how do you know when your croissants are proofed. I'm smiling because I'm very excited. So these have been proofing for, what is it, like, it's been a while, right? 3 hours, 2.5 hours? Okay, so 2.5 hours, so on the long end of the range, these are proofed. To me, they remind me of Michelin men. They look like they've been inflated a little bit. The tools that you have to determine if they're proofed enough, they're basically all visual because we do not want to touch these. They are super delicate. While the oven is preheating, I'm going to uncover these and actually stick the trays in the fridge. One, it's going to slow down the proofing so they don't overproof while the oven preheats. And second, they are going to firm up in the fridge. It's going to make it easier to apply an egg wash. Carefully uncover them because you don't want to disturb any of the layers. And as I uncover them, I can show you, see how there's a little bit of a wobble on these guys when I gently shake the pan. That's an indication that there is lots of gas in these and they are proofed. We want a beautiful, shiny, burnished exterior. The best way to get that is to brush it with a mixture of egg yolk and heavy cream. Basically, a half eggshell is a tablespoon. This gives you both browning and shine. The oven is preheated. Now we're going to apply the egg wash. You don't want to poke the croissants at all. They are so puffy and light that they're also on the verge of collapse. I don't want to coat the exposed layers in egg because the egg could fuse them together and prevent this kind of separation from happening. So I'm only going to coat the smooth top surfaces of the croissant with the egg wash. I think of in Charlotte's Web, where like toward the end, where Wilbur is getting brought to the county fair and the farmer's wife bathes him in buttermilk. This is just what this makes me think of. I think as a child, like that image really stuck with me. Someone tell me to stop fussing with them. Thank you, thank you. Sometimes I need to hear that. Okay, we're gonna go into the oven. Thank you. Okay, be gentle. And now, don't touch them. Anyone else just want to like sit in front of this the whole time and watch them? Oh my God, it smells so good. If they could pump this smell into like every open house of every house on the market ever, a huge spike in house sales. It's that thing, it's like bake chocolate chip cookies when people try to buy your house or whatever. Oh, that's my timer. I'm gonna rotate each pan 180 degrees so that what's in the front of the oven is gonna go toward the back. I'm also going to switch racks. So what's on the top is gonna go on the bottom, bottom to the top. This is just all in service of having all the croissants brown evenly. croissant troubleshooting. A lot of times you don't know when something has gone wrong in the process until you bake. So one thing that happens commonly is the butter leaks out of the croissants and pools on the baking sheet during baking. It could be that your croissants got too warm during proofing and the butter just kind of melts out. The other thing is your dough could just not be super well rested. That's another reason why I like leaving the slab overnight. Generally one that's flat but like wide, like a big footprint but flat, means that you overproofed them. They just don't grow a whole lot. Then you certainly underproofed them. You're not having this sort of webbed, even interior. That's a sign that your butter probably got too soft while you were laminating. There's a lot of stuff here. It's just so technical and sensitive throughout the process, but they're gonna taste great no matter what. So I prefer a well done or bien cuit croissant, which I think these are. None of this like pale, this is too high for me to kick this up. Sorry. All right, here they are. I'll let them cool on the baking sheets, and then we're definitely gonna cut into these and see. This one looks great. You can see the spiral. There aren't huge air gaps, which I'm happy about. And I do have somewhat of a honeycomb. So I'm really happy with this. I think this is a great result for people at home. There are a few baked goods that I can think of that hit as many textural notes as a croissant. And it is this miraculous combination of extremely rich and very light, plus this very toasty, shattering exterior. Like, to me, it's hard to think of a higher achievement of pastry than a croissant. So once you know the whole method and process for making the croissant dough, it opens you up to being able to make lots of different variations on the classic crescent. So I'm going to show you how to do a ham and cheese version and a pain au chocolat or a chocolate croissant version. And we're using the exact same dough. The slab is rolled into slightly different dimensions, and I'm going to show you how to cut and form them, and then they proof the same way the croissants proof. So these are called bâtons or bâtonnets. These are designed especially for pain au chocolat. So I special ordered these. These are really not something you can typically find in any kind of grocery store or even a specialty food store. If you don't want to order them, you can go ahead and use bar chocolate that we can cut into similar sized bars. These bars broke when I was carrying them here, but that's okay. And I'm just going to slice crosswise, and I think it actually is easier if you sort of score it. All right, so the scoring and breaking method, to me, you get less breakage that way because obviously chocolate is brittle and it's going to want to break up into different pieces. These are slightly smaller, so we're going to cut 10 rather than 8. This is the dimensions that I want. So I'm going to mark 3-inch widths. Okay, that was weirdly hard, but I got it. I'll lengthen it a little bit. Place it about between 1/2 and 1 inch in from one of the short ends. Then we are going to wrap the dough around the stick of chocolate. And then right where you have this seam, you're gonna nestle in another stick of chocolate and keep rolling. Make sure that chocolate is fully inside the dough. And then look at how cute that is. I'm just gonna set up another slab, exact same way, and show you how to roll in the ham and cheese. You could really use any kind of thinly sliced hams from any grocery store in like the deli aisle, already packaged. That's totally fine. This is an Emmental. You could use Swiss cheese, you could use Gruyere, perfect. I wanna make sure that I'm using something around 1/2 ounce. Wow, I'm kind of nailing it with these quantities. And then leave a little bit of a border along the short end so you can kind of get the spiral going, and then just fold. They're a little bit like chubbier than the pain au chocolat. There you go. So there's all sorts of things you can do with stale croissants to revive them and bring them back. And one of my favorite things to do is make almond croissants. It's like incredible. So they come together pretty fast. I'm gonna toast it. So usually a frangipan doesn't call for this step, but I think it adds a lot of flavor. you're not having to make it light and fluffy like you would if you were making a cake. That's just not necessary. We want it well blended. It gets that really intense almondy flavor from extract that really almost, I don't know how to describe it. I'm gonna make my rum simple syrup. Simple syrup is just equal parts water and sugar. Take it off the heat. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of dark rum. And then I have 8 really old, I baked these a couple days ago, croissants. They're kind of sad. This batch I overproofed so you can see they're really flat. I'm cutting them in half like I was gonna make a sandwich. The first thing we're going to do is soak the cut sides of all the halves with the syrup. When products like this stale, they're losing a lot of the moisture, so we are replacing some of that moisture that has been lost. And I'm gonna take half of this mixture and divide it evenly among the 8 bottom halves of the croissants. Spread the frangipane across the entire surface all the way to the edges. The lids go back on top. So like that? Yeah. The second half of the frangipane goes across the tops. You can see this is why I didn't assemble on the baking sheets, because I have crazy crumbs and everything, and those crumbs would burn. Oh God, okay. Whew. Love these. Feel like a baking fairy godmother here to say that, like, you can do this at home. I've never made so many croissants in a 24-hour period as I have here. Feeling very good about all this. Okay, so here is my ham and cheese. I don't know, I don't really use this word, but these are kind of transcendent, truly. I don't know, it's hard to even describe. Like, so good. This looks like it could come from a bakery. Silky is, like, to me, the word that comes to mind, just so good. It looks like kind of a meager amount of chocolate, but the chocolate is a very, very strong flavor, so I don't think that it actually ends up being too little chocolate. Maybe this one's my favorite now, I don't know. If there's anything that comes close to a freshly baked croissant, it's a twice baked croissant. It's amazing to take something which is already so delicious, the plain all butter croissant, and then to be able to transform it into pastries of this variety, where like one is more delicious than the next, is incredible. It's something you can do and try to perfect for the rest of your life. And along the way, you're gonna eat like a million delicious croissants, and that sounds like an awesome project. I just think I don't know, I keep like looking down and getting a little lost in my thoughts, because this is still overwhelming. This swirl is hypnotizing. I'm enthralled. Hopefully, if you try these at home, you're also enthralled by the process, which is, to me, nothing short of a miracle. Baking is a miracle. Oh my God, I need to sit down and drink this coffee.